I wanted to give this a brief introduction for people who might have stumbled onto it. Don't worry, I'll get out of the way in less than a minute. Famidaily was my project to document Nintendo's family computer system, and it took up a full 3 years of my life. In the time since I've completed it, and the follow-up project, the Year of FDS, I've had several people ask me for compilation videos, putting everything together into one nice package. And that's what this is, the first of these compilation videos. The episodes in this video are the first 28 days of my work, as I was figuring out what I was doing. I've trimmed the intros and outros so you don't have to sit through long gaps. If you're wondering about missing the stingers, I didn't start doing those until around episode 150. All of the original episodes will still be there if you want to look up a particular game. Okay, I told you I'd be done in less than a minute. For me, all of this started with Game Center CX. About 10 years ago, on a forgotten message board, someone posted something pointing out this Japanese reality show where a comedian played old video games. I watched it, I enjoyed it, and then a little while later, on a different message board, somebody brought it up and I go, "Oh, I like that show too." And that person translated one of the episodes and made a script for it. And then I took that script and put subtitles on the episode. And before long, I was helping subtitle a lot of Game Center CX for people. And in that process, I got the idea into my head, what if I collected all the games that were played on the show? And some of these were easy to collect in the US and various NES cartridges, but some of them were Japanese only. And so on a trip to Japan, I bought myself a Famicom and the start of a Famicom collection. After a while, I started thinking maybe I should collect Famicom in general. And my collection's grown quite a bit. I now have around 700 Famicom games. I didn't just want to keep a hoard of games for myself, though. I like sharing this stuff with people. When it comes to video games, my hobby is getting the weird and unusual ones. One thing I found out while collecting Famicom games is that there isn't a lot of information out there about a lot of them. For many games, you might find a 3-minute video on YouTube where somebody plays it for a couple seconds and then turns it off. Or in the worst cases, I might find an entry that just tells me that this is a game that exists. Even on the Japanese side of the internet, a lot of this stuff is poorly documented. What Famidaily is going to be is an attempt to document all 1,041 commercial game releases for the Famicom that were licensed. I'm going to do this in chronological order, starting from the era of single-screen arcade games with Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye on launch day in 1983, and coming to an end in the era of 3D graphics and complex games in 1994 with Adventure Island 4. I know I'm not going to be able to keep up the daily part of the name. The pace of producing a video a day is pretty grueling. However, as I record this, I have over 30 episodes in the can. Enough that I'm expecting the first 4 or 5 months to be daily. Once I've run out my buffer, we'll see where things lie. Since my goal is to produce a video every day on a game, a lot of these aren't going to be as in-depth as they could be. More of a general overview, a sampling, a quick demonstration. Since this is going to involve a lot of Japanese material, I suppose I should mention how familiar I am with the language. While I've taken several years of Japanese in college, I describe my abilities as just enough to get into trouble. I can work my way through some of the RPGs with a dictionary next to me, but I'm going to make some mistakes. My intention is to play the games on original unmodified hardware. I have an AV Famicom, the second revision, that outputs just composite. The picture won't look as sharp as if I emulated it or had a RGB modded console, but I'm trying to stick to the original hardware as much as possible. There will likely be points where I will have to play the US version of a game or possibly an emulated version of a game. I won't hit those for quite a while, though. Now, if you're a big Famicom fan, you might have noticed that 1041 games doesn't really match the list of Famicom software that's out there. For my own sanity, I am eliminating certain things. By games only, I'm not including Famicom Basic, Famicom Tax Preparation software, Famicom Bicycle Design software. All of those are out. For commercial releases, things like homebrew games and the Columbus Circle releases in recent years are not being included. And for Famicom-only games, I'm not counting anything that relies on external hardware for any kind of processing or memory. So detached games, Famicom Disk System games, the Study Box, the Konami system that is used for educational software, none of those will be counted in this. Other peripherals are fine. Basically, the dividing line is, do you plug something into the Famicom cartridge slot and then plug another cartridge into what you plugged into that cartridge? Okay, let's get started with this and move on to episode 1. I'll see you there. July 15th, 1983 wasn't a pleasant day in Tokyo. It was a stormy day, the kind that you often get in midsummer. But for those kids who ventured out to their toy stores, they'd find on the shelves a brand new system from the biggest arcade game manufacturer around. There were even ports of their most popular games available. And those kids bought Sega SG-1000s. But the other big arcade manufacturer to release a console that day was Nintendo. The Famicom had a rocky start. A serious hardware defect rendered most of the first systems out the door inoperable within a few weeks. Nintendo had to have a product recall, an enormous warranty repair issue. It cost the company a lot of money and nearly put them out of business that year. But the Famicom also became the hottest toy in Japan in 1983. In a year that started with exactly one console available on the Japanese market and ended with 8, the Famicom was the one that survived. 3 games were available for the Famicom on launch day: Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye. Given that Donkey Kong is very much the foundation of Nintendo's success, it's the place that we have to start when it comes to talking about Famicom games. I'll be honest, the need to talk about Donkey Kong is the thing that's delayed me from starting this project. I've been planning it for well over a year, trying out different ideas in my head, different ways that I could show off some weird old games. And I kept coming back to chronologically going through the catalog. But there was Donkey Kong right at the start. One of the most popular and important games ever made, and something that everyone has talked about. If you're willing to watch a video series about a guy going through the Famicom library, odds are you are extremely familiar with Donkey Kong. You know about Shigeru Miyamoto, you know about Jumpman, you know about the Universal lawsuit. There isn't a whole lot to say about Donkey Kong because so many people have said so much about it. But let's zoom in tight on the Famicom version and take a look at what it offered. This classic game and foundation of the platformer genre has Mario climbing a construction site in order to rescue his friend Lady from the clutches of the gorilla Donkey Kong. And I do mean Mario, not Jumpman. The manual of the Famicom version does give his name as Mario, although Pauline has yet to get a distinctive name. Donkey Kong throws barrels down, launches girders, and has fireballs that follow Mario around. Mario's options are to jump over them, grab the hammer to smash them, and knock out rivets to collapse the structure on Donkey Kong. Along the way, he can collect some of Pauline's lost items for extra points. The Famicom version switches the playfield down to fit television screens, and removes one of the 4 stages that are in the arcade game. That 4th stage, known as the Cement Factory, is not commonly seen in the US arcade version because you have to clear 7 stages before you see it. The US arcade version rearranged all the stages so that even the elevator level didn't appear until the 4th level. With only 3 screens in the game, let's walk through them one by one. The ramp stages are the most technical and interesting of the 3. Donkey Kong starts the stage by launching a barrel down into the oil, which catches it on fire, and that fireball can pursue Mario, but it will not move up beyond the 2nd ramp. Another concession to players is that the barrels will drop down either by going off the end of the ramps or down ladders, but they won't go down ladders if Mario is at the top of them. Mario can sit there forever, safe, without a barrel going into him. In the arcade version of Donkey Kong, and in some other home ports, it's possible for Mario to die on this stage by walking into Donkey Kong. He can't do that here. There's a small platform that prevents you from getting close to the monkey. There's also a bug on the ramp stage that will let you complete it very quickly. If you go to the ladder at the end of the first platform, and instead of climbing up it, you go down, you'll descend from the top of the screen. You have to be standing on a specific pixel in order for this to work, but it's a good way to get by everything. Another interesting glitch worth mentioning on these stages is that if you jump over a barrel as it goes down a ladder, it will score it as multiple jumps over the barrel. This is a sneaky way that you can rack up a lot of points. Moving on to the elevator stage, this is a good place to demonstrate how Mario behaves differently from later platformers. In a lot of early platformers, you could die by falling too far, and there's plenty of opportunities here for that to happen. There's a trick for clearing this stage quickly as well, although it's more skillful play than bug. It's possible to jump up to the elevator as it descends and then jump again immediately to get to the steps on the far side. If you get down onto the ground and try to touch the bottom of the elevator, you'll die even though there's nothing there. I've always found that handbag in the upper right kind of tricky to get. The fireball always seems to hover around it on me. But you can lure it down and then quickly jump over to get it. Finally, let's look at the rivet stage. The fireballs here can be jumped over, but in my experience it requires a great deal of precision. I find it much easier to run around and just get the rivets knocked out to drop Donkey Kong on his head. No clever tricks to this one, though I'll point out that if you knock out this rivet and then pick up the hammer, you're probably not going to be getting a lot of points. You can run into Donkey Kong on this stage, the only place in the game that you still can. After Donkey Kong takes his big fall, the whole thing just loops again with the difficulty increased. If you select Game B from the title screen, it actually starts the game at the difficulty of the second loop. The Famicom version of Donkey Kong was the best home port of Donkey Kong to that point. Nintendo licensed out the Donkey Kong arcade game to other game companies in the United States, but none of those ports were released in Japan, and none of them showed the same quality as Nintendo's own port. It's still a good way to play this classic arcade game. That's it for the game itself, but there's still more to talk about. Donkey Kong is the first game in the Pulse Line series. The first few Famicom releases came in a consistent trade dress where they had this pulse symbol on the cartridge. Eventually, some of these games were re-released in what's called the Silver Box series, where the label was changed so that the picture on the label was the same as the picture on the cover. The back of these original boxes was nothing special. There are no screenshots, just a small block of text describing the game. The price I listed on the data card was for 3,800 yen. That was not the consistent price for this game throughout the Famicom's lifetime. A few years later, Nintendo raised the price on cartridges to 4,500 yen. Finally, since we're just starting out, I want to point out something on the cartridge label. Almost every Famicom cartridge has a code on it to indicate what cart it is. This code is 3 letters to indicate the manufacturer, a dash, and then 2 letters to indicate the game. There's one exception to this, but we'll cover that once we reach it. That's it for me, and we've started our journey through the Famicom library. I'll see you next time. So Donkey Kong was a smash hit, and you know what that means? It's time for a sequel. A new game was put into development and quickly released to the arcades. And on July 15th, 1983, that game was brought home for Japanese players to a new console. Yes, when they picked up their SG-1000, they could get Congo Bongo, the game that started as a sequel to Donkey Kong from the programmers of that game, Ikigami Tsushinki. But we don't care about that one, that's on another platform. Let's look at the sequel Nintendo developed, Donkey Kong Jr. When I was young, I preferred Donkey Kong Jr. to Donkey Kong, but I was young and stupid then. Donkey Kong Jr. just really isn't a worthy follow-up to Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong has a position of importance in Nintendo. Donkey Kong Jr.? Well, he came back for Mario Kart. Sure, Rare implies that he's the Donkey Kong of the Donkey Kong Country series, but really that's a whole new character. Junior was kind of a dead end for the series. Let's take a look at the Famicom port. Superficially, it's better than the Donkey Kong port. Donkey Kong Jr. has music that plays throughout the whole setting. It's got all 4 stages of the arcade version. There's less compromises in bringing Donkey Kong Jr. home than there were in bringing Donkey Kong to a home console. And that's despite it being a more recent game. But Donkey Kong Jr.'s gameplay is where the failings of it are. Let's walk through this board by board and take a look at how it works. The goal of most of the levels is to get to Mario, who's holding Donkey Kong captive. You climb the vine at the end of it, touch the key, and Mario steals Donkey Kong away to the next stage. With the first vine stage, Junior has to climb up and around while avoiding the snap jaws. The blue snap jaws depart from Mario and wander along that top platform until they climb down a vine and fall off the bottom of the stage. The red ones wander back and forth across the stage. The one on the left is kind of stuck in that platform area, and the one on the right can wander freely between the vines. Junior has 2 different climbing moves. When he has a grip on 2 vines, he climbs upward very fast, but goes down slowly. When he's on 1 vine, he slides down quickly, but climbs up very slowly. That give and take in the movement speed is probably the best feature of Donkey Kong Jr. It's something that came back in the Donkey Kong Country games as well. The problem is that there's only one stage that actually uses that movement speed mechanic. You can see this on this vine stage. You can climb up the first pair, but then when you go to the third vine over, you have to only use one hand. You get to the far side, there's no reason not to climb up with two hands. There's a very narrow path that you can follow to get through the stage, and there's not much room for dodging or maneuvering. The fruit gives you a weapon as a chance to increase your score. Knocking it loose from a vine will make it drop, and if it hits an enemy on the way down, you'll get some points. And those points grow if you hit multiple enemies. There's one more option for dealing with enemies, but you won't see it very often. You can jump over them like you could with the barrels in the original Donkey Kong. That nets only 100 points, and the real quirks in the design show up in the second vine stage. Immediately upon starting the stage, you're faced with the spring, and you can jump off that spring to get to the lower platform and take the slow, long path around, where you might encounter an occasional egg dropped from a bird, then climb up, then have to make a jump to a vine, and then land on the platform, and then another jump, and then finally cross over. Or you could just jump from the spring and land on that moving platform. The grip that extends up and down means that you have to time your jump a little bit better, but even there, it doesn't move once you've grabbed onto it. There's no risk of falling off as it moves up. The birds come in a set pattern, first high and then low and then back again. Once the difficulty increases, it adds another middle tier, but it still follows a very set pattern, making them trivial to dodge. That lowest fruit, by the way, it can never hit a bird. It's pointless. Again, with this vine stage, you follow a very narrow path around. There's not many options for where you can go or how you can dodge, until you wind up at Donkey Kong and move on to the next one. The electrical plant stage is the worst of the four. Just walk back and forth on those platforms, jumping over the sparks as they show up. You can even walk off the platforms here and you just automatically grab onto those wires. It's very easy to do this section. There's one more trick that's easy to show off on the Spark stage. Donkey Kong Jr. can jump backwards if you press the opposite direction he's facing and the jump button at the same time. You don't get anything for doing this, but it looks kind of neat. The fourth and final board is the best of them. It involves pushing keys to the top to unlock the cage and free Donkey Kong. Here, the one- and two-handed grip on the chains actually comes into play, as you have to be able to move up and down swiftly to avoid the birds. The bottom is a safe zone. The birds don't go down that low, so you won't be hit by them. And if you're not standing directly underneath the chain, a snap trap won't get you either. So you've pushed all the keys to the top and unlocked the cage. Donkey Kong is free, and Mario is dead. At least until the next loop starts. Then you get to do it all over again. In the Famicom version, the game crashes if you beat level 134. No, I did not have enough patience to play that long so that I could see it for you. There's not much more to cover in this simple arcade game, but I can at least mention the packaging. Donkey Kong Jr. is one of the early games that got a cart variation, as later releases replaced the Pulse Line label with one that included the image from the front of the box. Another re-release was packaged in with the Sharp Famicom Twin, the Famicom and disk system in one unit. That cartridge came with Donkey Kong Jr. and a stripped-down version of Donkey Kong Jr. Math on it. So Donkey Kong Jr. has an interesting mechanic with its vine climbing, but it doesn't really use it effectively. The stages feel even more constrained than the ones on Donkey Kong. Overall, it's an okay early arcade game, but not one that really feels like an all-time classic either. There's a tendency among Nintendo fans to present Shigeru Miyamoto as a god among men, a divine creator from whom all good video gaming springs. If there's one lesson that we can learn from Popeye, it's that Miyamoto is mortal. Of the 3 launch games, Donkey Kong is a masterpiece. Donkey Kong Jr. is very flawed, but there's still some fun in it. And Popeye is the mistake. Now don't get me wrong, for a 1983 arcade game, Popeye is fine. I've played and will play much worse than it, but as one of the 3 foundational titles for the Famicom, it just doesn't stand up. Every few years I forget how much I dislike playing Popeye. And I think, oh yeah, Popeye, that was a fun arcade game. And then I play it again and I go, oh right. This is why I don't like it. Similar to Donkey Kong, heavy compromises were made to bring Popeye to the Famicom. But unlike Donkey Kong, the compromises made to Popeye were core aspects of the gameplay. It took an already iffy arcade game and made it worse. So let's walk through the game and take a look at what went wrong and what went right in Popeye. All 3 levels on Popeye have the same basic premise. Olive Oil is at the top, and she is throwing out objects that Popeye has to collect before they fall off the stage. If they hit the bottom, they last for a short time before they break, and then you lose a life if that happens. Collect 24 of these items and you move on to the next stage. While you're collecting these, you're pursued by Bluto, who jumps around from platform, reaches up and down, and throws bottles at you if you're on the same level as he is. Bluto can only be stopped by picking up some spinach and running him down. While you're powered up by the spinach, Popeye's theme song from the old cartoons plays, and all scoring is doubled. And that's one of my first complaints about the game. Spinach is the iconic thing for Popeye. He eats spinach and then punches out Bluto. Bluto takes off running as soon as you collect the spinach and always moves away from Popeye. The level layouts can make it very difficult to catch Bluto if you're not in the right position when you collect the spinach. It reduces the impact of collecting it, and because there's only 1 can of spinach per level per life, if you miss it, it feels like you've missed out on a big part of the game. On top of that, if you do knock him out, you often can't do anything else while you wait for the song to finish playing. Falling items don't move while Popeye's theme is playing, and so if you collect all of them, you might be waiting 5 or 10 seconds with nothing to do, listening to the music. After you complete all 3 levels once on Game A, or immediately on Game B, the Sea Hag also appears in the upper right, dropping skulls down. The skulls will bounce around on the floor, and those you can punch out. Let's start looking at the individual levels. The first stage just has a set of tiers that you can walk back and forth on, with stairs and a ladder in the middle. It's very open. The spot where the sign says through means that you can go out that left side and come back on the right. The most notable thing on this one is at the very top there's that tub. If you jump off that little platform and punch, you'll knock it down, and if Bluto is standing right underneath it, you'll put it on his head and stun him for a few seconds. It's a nice cartoony touch, but it's also something that's easier said than done. This first stage is a good place to point out the differences between the arcade and the Famicom version. In the arcade, the Sea Witch is an omnipresent threat, constantly appearing at the sides to throw extra bottles at Popeye. Here, she's restrained to appearing only in the upper right-hand corner and throwing skulls. The items Olive throws in the arcade version are much more numerous and fast-moving. It gives the game a more frantic pace. Now, they always step down the difficulty a bit when they bring it home. But in Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., Game B was roughly equivalent to the arcade difficulty. Here, it never gets as challenging as the arcade. The second level has Olive singing out notes from an apartment, and it has a much more tricky layout. On the left-hand side of the screen is a seesaw which you can jump down to and get shot up to the top to Sweepy for some extra points. If Bluto jumps down that left-hand side, he doesn't go up quite as high as Popeye does. The third and final level has Olive screaming for help from the top of a ship. This level adds in a new obstacle with a buzzard that flies around, but the buzzard can be punched to kill it. Here the layout becomes a lot more confusing. The platform at the top, it moves when you step onto it, so you can sling yourself back and forth. Only the very bottom goes completely across the stage. Everything else has gaps in the middle of it. Sometimes some of the letters go a bit wild on this stage too, shooting out of the right and left hand side of the screen to fly wildly. As you collect the letters, a ladder is built on screen, but you can't interact with it at all. You can't climb up it or down it to get between tiers. It's just there as part of the background. And what I've just shown you is literally all there is to playing Popeye. I find it to be extremely easy to play. In the footage I captured for this video, on my first game, I got to level 7. The action is kind of slow and clunky. On higher rounds, it becomes more interesting between the sea hag throwing skulls and the letters or hearts or notes moving much faster, but it's still just not that great. The layout of each of the levels isn't really conducive to a great flow of gameplay. Bluto being the sole obstacle in most cases isn't that interesting or difficult to avoid. If it wasn't for the Nintendo brand, Popeye would be another forgotten early 80s arcade game consigned to the dustbin of history. And I think the reception of Popeye kind of proves that out. Even during the Famicom boom days between 1984 and 1985, when even the most innocuous of games could get 1 million sales, Popeye sold under 500,000 units in Japan. That's a lot of copies, but it's also kind of middle of the road for Famicom cartridges at the time. But if there's one thing that's most damning about this game, it's that when Nintendo lost the license to Popeye in the early 90s, they never bothered to seek it out again to reprint this game. Even now, when they could easily afford it if they wanted to put Popeye back out there for fans, it's just not. They're not interested. Nintendo's Popeye is probably never going to be re-released, and I can't say I'm really going to miss it. There was this strange trend in early 80s home consoles. It wasn't enough that you had a system that could play the latest arcade hits. They also had to prove to parents that they were serious machines that could be used for more than just those things that kids put the quarters or 100 yen coins into. So a lot of the libraries wound up getting filled out with traditional games. The Atari 2600, for example, had a surprisingly impressive chess game for a console that could barely run anything. Nichibutsu, a company that we're going to be seeing quite a bit of as I go through this project, released a console dedicated to these traditional games, emphasizing that it could play Mahjong. Sega, on the other hand, released a variation on the SG-1000 as a dedicated Othello machine. Nintendo didn't wind up going down that route very much themselves. they only released games based on two different traditional games, Mahjong and Gomoku. We'll get to Mahjong next time because it's kind of important. Gomoku Narabe is that game's overlooked little brother. The name means 5 in a row in Japanese, and that tells you the basic rules of the game. Players alternate placing go stones down at intersections on a go board, and the goal is to be the first player to score 5 in a row. Now, if you know anything about game theory, you know that the first player in this type of game has an enormous advantage. Gomoku Narabe takes care of this by placing restrictions on the first player. The first player is always black, which is as it is in Go. The black player may not place a stone so that there are 2 sections where there are 3 stones in a row. They also cannot do this with 4 stones, and they can't place a stone so that there is 6 in a row. If you do any of this while you are the black player, it's an automatic game over. But going for these moves is an excellent play as a white player. Let's talk strategy. Ideally, you want to get an open-ended 4 in a row. That is 4 stones placed in a row with no stone blocking either side. The other player can block one side of it, but not the other, giving you the 5 in a row. Practically speaking, this is the only real way to win as the black player. The white player is free of restrictions on multiple threats, and so if you can place a stone so that there are 2 open-ended 3 in a rows, the other player won't be able to close them all off before you complete a 5 in a row. There is a momentum in the game. If you can force the other player to constantly react to your threats, then you'll probably do better. If you're forced on the defensive, though, keep an eye out for opportunities to place stones near each other. When you eventually can place stones freely, you'll have more opportunities to get momentum. The Famicom game has 3 difficulty settings, a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. I didn't really notice the beginner setting making a lot of mistakes, though. It's not a freebie, anyone can win difficulty. The computer plays equally well on the intermediate and advanced difficulties. The advanced difficulty adds a game time clock, though, that starts at 90 seconds and ticks down whenever you're making a move. Matches are done in batches of 6, with each player alternating between being the white and black player. I can get why this was chosen as one of the first Famicom games. Traditional game, so there's no need to license it. But also, the AI is very simple. It's not a strain on the Famicom hardware to play this, even on the advanced level. Surprisingly, this game also got a re-release. The box art isn't much to look at, but they applied it to the label. And that's really all there is to say about Gomoku Narabe. It's fine. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. But if you're curious and you want to play this game, I actually don't recommend the Famicom one. There's a Game Boy version of this game called Taikyoku Renju Gomoku Narabe. It plays a bit smoother, but the real advantage is the game's entirely in English, despite only ever being released in Japan. We'll actually see some Go games as I go through the Famicom library, but this is the only Gomoku game. It gives it kind of a weird place in history, especially since it's one of the few traditional games that were released by Nintendo themselves. Here we are at last, Mahjong. Probably the most important video game that you've never played. There were 3 system sellers in the early days of the Famicom. Mahjong was the first of them. We'll get to the other 2 in the next few days. You might think that the things that we remember, like the big arcade ports, were the smash hits on the Famicom, but generally speaking, it was the other games that sold well. Mahjong was the 8th best-selling Famicom cartridge of all time, selling over 2.1 million units in Japan. Mahjong was huge. Now, it should be said that this was not the first way to play Mahjong at home against a computer. Portable, handheld LCD Mahjong units existed at the time. Think pocket calculators or Game & Watches that could play Mahjong. Even Nintendo had one that they made contemporaneously with the Famicom in 1983. And Nichibutsu released a console dedicated to Mahjong, although you could plug in cartridges to play other things. But Mahjong was Nintendo's way of getting the Famicom into homes. Sure, kids would buy it for Donkey Kong, but parents would buy it for Mahjong. The very first commercial for the Famicom featured Mahjong as the game that people could play on it. It was the Wii Sports of 1983. And Mahjong became a huge genre on the Famicom. There's over 25 Mahjong games that we're going to see before this is through. Even Nintendo went back to the Mahjong well, with 2 more Mahjong games, including a direct sequel to this one that comes out next year. So what is Mahjong? Well, Mahjong is a whole group of games that are basically set-building games along the lines of Rummy. It's played with tiles rather than with cards, and there's more variations of it out there than you can count. In Japan, the most common version is Uchi Mahjong, a variation where instead of just completing a hand that can go out, you want to complete different styles of hands. The Famicom Mahjong is a variant of Uchi Mahjong that uses 2 players instead of 4. There are features of hands called yaku, and as you collect the right tiles to complete these, if you have one of them, you can go out. But it might be possible to restructure that hand that can go out right now to get more yaku. And because the game is played with each player starting with a set number of points and then gaining or losing those from other players, getting more and better yaku means a better score. The points lend themselves to gambling as well. Let's take a crash course through the absolute minimum that you need to know to play Mahjong. There are 3 suites of tiles: numbers, bamboo, and dots. These count from 1 to 9. There's other tiles as well, but we're skipping them. There are 4 copies of each of these tiles in a Mahjong set. On each turn, you draw 1 tile from the pile, and then you discard 1. You want to build sets of 3, or runs of 3. You can build sets of 4, but runs longer than 3 do not count. Once you have 4 sets of 3, or 4 runs of 3, you also need 1 pair of tiles. Once you have that, you can go out. There are extra yaku for having things like all tiles of the same suite, the same 3 of a kind in all 3 suites, a full run 1 to 9, generally things like that. You can pick up tiles that your opponent discards if they complete a set. This is called pon if it's a set of 3, or chi if it's a run of 3. You have to reveal the set that you've made when you take the tile, and this can affect some of the more advanced yaku. You can also declare when you are 1 tile away from completing your hand. This will get you bonus points when you go out, but lose you points if your opponents beat you. There's a lot more to Mahjong than that, but just having someone explain it to you can often sound like Captain Kirk explaining the rules of Fizbin. I'm pretty far from an expert at the game. I have to play with a cheat sheet open on a computer next to it, telling me the different yaku that I can go for. And even when I can barely play it, I can recognize that Mahjong's a pretty interesting game. There's a lot of strategy involved, enough luck to vary things up. There's a lot of give and take in how it plays. I can see why it's popular. Of course, there I was talking about the traditional game. The first Famicom release actually strips it down a bit, paring the game from 4 players to just 2. And I think that actually makes it a better introduction than some. A 4-player Mahjong game has a lot more going on, while a 2-player game, it's easier to think of it as an advanced gin rummy. And that, weirdly enough, makes this Mahjong game one of the better ones to pick up and try. Of course, you would have to read a bit of Japanese in this case, otherwise you won't know how to chi or pon. By being a simpler version of Mahjong, this Famicom Mahjong is actually more interesting to play as a beginner. Go figure. Unsurprisingly, Mahjong had quite a few re-releases. It got the same silver box label treatment. It also got a Famicom Disk System version. We'll be coming back to Uchi Mahjong a lot as I walk through the Famicom library. But of the ones that I've played so far, I can honestly say I like Nintendo's best. I haven't played all of them. It's only about 10 of them or so. But this one's been the most friendly one to play. The most accessible one as someone who can't play Mahjong. Maybe that's part of why it did so well. So far I've looked at 3 Famicom games that were based on Nintendo arcade games. Donkey Kong was a masterpiece, both in the arcade and at home. Donkey Kong Jr. had a good gameplay concept, but couldn't quite follow through with it. And Popeye was a bit of a mess. That brings me to Mario Brothers. It was less than 3 months old when Nintendo brought it to the Famicom. Still a hot arcade game at that moment. 1983 was an inflection point for arcade games. It was the last year that single-screen arcade games were still viable. Scrolling had already started to show up in games like Xevious, and soon scrolling action games would be the norm. But in 1983, Mario Brothers was king. And it was exceptional. Mario Brothers is the second masterpiece to come from Nintendo. Over the years, it's gotten a bit lost, sandwiched in between the genre-defining Donkey Kong and the industry-defining Super Mario Brothers. And that's a shame, since it's a perfect example of early 80s arcade design done flawlessly. All of the gameplay elements combined together in Mario Brothers to make something better than the sum of their parts. The way they interact off of each other. It makes it an exceptional game. There are no boards to talk about this time. All the stages share the same layout. And in the Famicom version, there's 12 enemy patterns that loop through. Each stage follows the same pattern as monsters emerge from the pipes at the top of the screen, and Mario and his newly introduced brother Luigi have to bop them from underneath to knock them over, and then kick them off the platform. Once all the enemies have been knocked out, it's time to move on and do it again. A bonus stage occurs about every 4 levels, where the brothers race to collect pennies for extra points. It's a game that seems very simple, superficially. The devil's in the details, though, and the subtle interactions between the Mario brothers and those monsters. Let's look at the easiest one of these enemies to deal with. Kame-san, which just means turtle. In the US, they're called shell creepers, and none of them are Koopa Troopas. These turtles have the most basic pattern. They just emerge and walk in a straight line. You hit them once, and they turn over. Wait a little while, and they might turn back over. But you can see right here, if one of those turtles walks into one that's turned over, he reverses direction. Or he might get bumped into by a coin. If you ignore a monster for too long, it speeds up. And the very last monster speeds up a lot. There's strategy in how you have to bump the monsters to try to knock them forward and maybe bring them down to your level, or maybe you want to go up high to avoid something else. There's a zigzag pattern to their movement as they always emerge from the pipe above the one that they entered. That means they'll walk the opposite way that they did the previous time. So the turtles are pretty easy to deal with, but starting on the 4th stage, they start adding new enemies into the mix. The next one is Kani-san, or crabs. In the US, they're called sidesteppers. Hit these guys once underneath, and they get angry. It takes 2 blows to flip them over. But when they're angry, they also move faster. So the interactions are getting more complicated as the enemies progress. After that, in come the fighter flies, which weirdly enough have the exact same name in Japanese and in English. They bounce around the stage instead of walking, and you have to wait until they're on the ground to be able to hit them from below. The final enemy are the freezes, or slip ice in the US. These icicles just slide around the stage and sometimes stop to freeze the whole platform. This freeze effect lasts only until the end of the stage. Making your life even more difficult are the fireballs. Red fireballs just kind of randomly appear wherever, but the green fireballs appear anytime Mario lingers too long. If you wait around on a platform for a while, the green fireball will come along to force you to move. You can even beat the fireballs by bopping them from underneath, but it requires extremely precise timing. The major difference between Game A and Game B is how aggressive the fireballs are. In Game A, you might be able to wait on a platform a full 10 seconds before they show up. In Game B, you might have 3 seconds. Mario does have a weapon to deal with these enemies in the POW block that appears. Bopping it strikes all enemies currently on the ground. Fighter flies and enemies falling between platforms can avoid the effect, though. That does mean that the crabs might only become angry. And of course, if you can't get to anyone, then they'll turn over and become faster. That POW block serves a dual purpose, too. You can stand on it as a platform that the enemies will never reach. Well, almost never. The net result of all of this are a lot of game mechanics that interact in ways that are interesting. A lot of monsters emerging from the pipes means that the movement becomes more chaotic, but you've got tools that you can use to manage that. There are safe spaces to escape to, but you're always in danger of the green fireball. You've got an ultimate weapon you can use 3 times, but if you use it, you run the risk of making it more difficult as the enemies reawaken. There's a lot of risk-reward mechanics. You can manipulate enemy movements. You might hit all of the crabs once from below before you try to take them out, so that when the last one does speed up, it only requires 1 hit to take them out. It's a deeper game than you might realize, and that's before you add in Luigi. Now, unfortunately for me, I haven't been able to get anyone to help me record cooperative play in this. I had a victim lined up for a game, and they refused flat out to even try. Probably some lingering childhood trauma from playing Mario Brothers. Because while Mario Brothers is superficially a cooperative game, it never is cooperative for long. Mario and Luigi are interacting with the enemies and the stage at the same time, and they even interact with each other. You can bop the other player from below, or push them around. And no matter how cooperative a game starts, it won't be long before somebody bops a monster that the other player is about to kick off, resulting in them losing a life. It's a completely brilliant design for arcade owners, where kids would put in their 100 yen coins and before long try to kill each other off rather than help each other defeat the monsters. Like the other games I've talked about so far, Mario Bros. Did get a re-release with an updated label. It also got several more re-releases, but none of those came to the Famicom itself. An improved port was made very late in the NES's life, and that was released in Europe. There was a Famicom Disk System version of that, which also incorporated advertising. Mario Bros. Was recreated for Super Mario Bros. 3 as a minigame. Despite its awkward jumping mechanics and goofy-looking sprites, Mario Bros. Was exactly what Nintendo needed in 1983 for the Famicom. An excellent game that let two players go at each other. We're going to be seeing a lot more of that competitive gameplay soon. Hey parents, you know that thing you got a few months ago that lets your kids play Donkey Kong in the living room? What if they could use it to learn English? Is there any phrase that filled children with more dread than educational game? I know it's not hard to find good examples of quality educational games out there, but I think we've all seen more than our share of hastily prepared product designed to make parents think that they're getting their children something that will improve them, and instead what's in the package is barely any educational content at all and just isn't much fun. There actually isn't a whole lot of educational games on the Famicom. Nintendo published 2, and in 1986, Tokyo Shoseki published a series of 5 Keisan games, and that's really it. Maybe we could stretch it and call Family Basic an educational game, but I think that's a bit far. Popeye no Eigo Asobi falls under the category of the terrible educational game. The reused assets is a huge red flag. This game is basically Hangman. First you select a category, and in the simpler mode of the game, you're given a word in katakana. Then the player as Popeye has to bop out the letters for the equivalent English word. Get a letter wrong and Bluto hits Sweet Pea one more step toward falling down to his doom, although Popeye always catches Sweet Pea. Get enough right in a series of 10 words, and you get hearts from olive oil. Get too many wrong, and she showers affection upon Bluto. The difference between Word Puzzle A and Word Puzzle B is that in Word Puzzle B, the word never appears at all. It is strictly Hangman that you're playing. A complaint I've seen about this game on Japanese websites is that all of the Japanese is written in katakana. It's the writing system that's used for most loan words into Japanese, but since not all of the words used in Popeye no Eigo Asobi are normally written in katakana, it makes it difficult to understand for Japanese speakers. The final stage is Word Catcher, which is the 2-player mode of the game. It takes place on the pirate ship stage from Popeye, and you'll see 3 words written in Japanese on the left-hand side, and you have to collect the letters in order corresponding to those words. This can be tricky because you have to wait for the appropriate letters to get thrown, hope that wrong letters don't drift into you, which would reset your progress. And if you're playing 2 players, the second player is trying to collect the exact same letters at the same time. For what it's worth, this is the game that when I suggested somebody assist me in recording the video, they backed out from recording any videos with me at all. I can't even torment people with this game. So, short video this time, but that's because that's all there is to Popeye no Eigo Asobi. It was never re-released for obvious reasons, and it even fails as an educational tool. The most interesting thing I have to say about this is that I acquired my cart early on in my collecting because when I was ordering from Amazon.co.jp, I just saw Popeye and missed the rest of the title. That 3-second anecdote is more fun than you would possibly get out of this game. Here we are at last. The terror of all Famicom collectors. Baseball. Not Nintendo's baseball, which is what this game is, but the genre in general. By my count, and I might be off by one or two, there are 41 baseball games that were released on the Famicom. It is the single most popular genre on the system. 5 companies had yearly releases of baseball games. There is a lot of baseball to come, and it's going to be very difficult to tell the games apart. This baseball stands out by being the earliest one on the system. So it's a bit less refined. It's barely one step above what you would see on systems like the Intellivision or the Atari 2600. Take a look at Atari's Real Sports Baseball from 1982, and there really isn't that much difference between it and Nintendo's baseball. Yeah, Nintendo's baseball has marginally better sprites and team selections that stand in for Japan's actual baseball teams, but the gameplay is extremely similar. There's no stats for any player. Even what hand they pitch with and bat with is randomly selected. The teams are identical. When you start the game, the computer player is randomly chosen from one of the teams, and you cannot select that one. But that only affects what color uniforms they're wearing. I'll tell you up front that I'm not a sports fan. And even in that regard, I think baseball is something better read about after the fact than actually watched. But for the purposes of this video series, I'm going to play at least one full 9-inning game of every single one of these baseball games. Maybe I'll find one of them that rises to the level of actually being fun. But somehow I doubt it. There's one real difference between the Famicom version of baseball and the NES version of baseball. In the Japanese version, the pitch speed is given in kilometers per hour, while in the US version it's in miles per hour. Other than that, the two games are identical. Let's start with the offensive game, because that's a little bit easier to explain. You can maneuver your man around the batting box to change his position up slightly. He swings his bat when you press and hold A, but the bat only swings as long as A is held. So you can bunt by pressing A and then releasing when the bat is just horizontal across the plate. Stealing bases is done by pressing in the direction of the base that the player is on and pressing the B button. That's pretty much all you need to know for hitting. This really isn't a very complicated game. Defense is its own set of problems. Baseball video games have a fielding problem. In real life, the basics of fielding aren't too difficult. A pop fly is an easy out for even the most amateur of players. But video games make it difficult for the player to do anything in fielding. The ball goes up into the air, but you can't be sure where it's going to come down. The computer doesn't have that problem, of course. It can get right underneath any pop fly. Nintendo Baseball makes the ball harder to track than later games. There's no shadow underneath it, so you can't be exactly sure where it is or how high up it is. I've seen balls that I thought were rolling on the ground run right through people. And then there's controlling the fielders. Every fielder has a certain distance that they will go after a ball, and absolutely no further. So if you're chasing a ball down and it just out of your reach, suddenly your fielder will stop dead and let it roll out into the outfield where somebody could be very far away. And the movement of the characters is painfully slow in baseball. They chug around leisurely, like they have all the time in the world to get to that ball. Pitching is a little bit better, at least. You press A to pitch and can hold up or down to throw fastballs or sliders. If you throw a slow ball, you have more control over it on its path to the plate. Of course, there's no stats for the pitchers or fatigue, so you can throw fastballs all day long and never have them get their arm tired. Nintendo Baseball is a good example of all the problems I'm going to see in this genre going forward. There will be some things that mitigate them later on, but in general, batting will be simple, and fielding will be next to impossible. Meanwhile, the computer will be able to do any of it perfectly. The game improves somewhat when you play two-player, but the same can be said of any multiplayer game. Despite all of that, if there's one thing that can be counted on in video games, it's that sports games sell. And baseball was no different. It was the 8th best-selling Famicom game, with 2.35 million units sold. Naturally, it got multiple re-releases, with both the Silver Line picture cart, a Famicom Disk System release, a port to the Game Boy was one of that system's launch titles, and it even got back-ported as an arcade game. Still, there's absolutely no reason to go back to baseball now. It's not a good game. It wasn't really a good game when it was released. It wasn't a step forward for the genre or a revolution. It was literally just another sports game. So there's this game show in the UK called Countdown. It's been on the air forever, widely known over there, but practically unknown outside of the country. For half the show, contestants are given a pile of random letters and try to find words in it. And then for the other half of the show, they have to use math to try to get those numbers to come together to equal another number. I know my description doesn't sound like much, but it is kind of a fun show if you're an especially nerdy person who likes to try to do math in their head. And that's what Donkey Kong Jr. Sansu Asobi is. Well, that and the bane of all NES collectors. The US version, Donkey Kong Jr. Math, is best known for being annoyingly rare and expensive for a piece of software that no one ever wants to play. The Famicom version isn't nearly that rare, but it is still very unpopular. The primary game mode is strictly for 2 players, and as before, I don't have a victim to inflict this game on. Junior has to climb these chains to collect a number and then a mathematical symbol, with the hope of building to the number that Donkey Kong is holding at the top of the screen. The first game mode is Calculate A, where Donkey Kong holds a 2-digit number up, and mathematically all of these values are reachable in 2 calculation steps. Calculate B changes that to a 3-digit number, and that makes things both trickier and far less fun. And given that we're talking about an educational game, being less fun is quite an accomplishment. Since Junior can only work in 1-digit numbers, building a 3-digit number efficiently means identifying a nearby number that you can multiply to, and then working your way to the goal number with addition and subtraction. Anything else is just nightmarishly inefficient. Calculate B games can take quite a while to get to the target number. The exercise mode is for a single player, and it attempts to walk players through larger calculations. The catch is, it does this very poorly. The interface is a disaster, 0 doesn't appear in the list of numbers to select even when it's required for many of them. There's no logical flow in how you fill in the numbers for the calculations. As a math trainer, it doesn't work the way it needs to. Asobi in the title of these Nintendo educational games means play. And that's not something that either this game or the Popeye game delivered on. Donkey Kong Jr. is probably more educational than Popeye, but that's just because it actually involved doing math. While I'm not really sure how Popeye would assist children in knowing English. In collecting video games, there's something that I like to call shelf filler. A game that fills out a collection, but never comes off the shelf. Donkey Kong Jr. no Sansu Asobi is a prime example of shelf filler. It has been in my Famicom twice. Once when I got it to make sure it worked, and once when I recorded this video. It's probably never going to get plugged in again. Early video games had a lot to do with tennis. The very first game that we could actually call a video game, where it had controllers and action taking place on a screen in response to player inputs, was tennis. The first commercially successful arcade game was an adaptation of tennis. The earliest home consoles were an attempt to bring that tennis game to the living room. The Atari 2600 was a console solely built for playing their version of tennis with other games as an afterthought. Even Nintendo's first video game was an adaptation of tennis. It's easy to understand why the sport was so integral to that first decade and a half of video games. It was something easy to translate to an electronic medium. You had to have two figures on either side, a ball that passed in between them, and they just had to keep volleying back and forth. 3 objects that had to be tracked, and they could all be easily reduced to the most abstract shape. It's a sport of simplicity, and that lent itself to these conversions. So it's not a surprise that Nintendo made a tennis game for the Famicom. It might be more of a surprise that it took them 6 months to do so. I haven't found any confirmation of it, but I wouldn't be surprised if tennis wound up slipping a bit in development. It was Nintendo's first 1984 release, but it came out the second week of January. New Year's Day is the big shopping day for toys and games in Japan. And something you'll see going forward is that a lot of the releases get clustered around late December to take advantage of that. I'd like to think that Nintendo saw that they had something special in tennis, and so took the extra month or 2 to get it right. We're still in the era of simple Famicom games, so tennis is not a complex sport, but it manages to still get everything just right, and it's still fun to pick up and play a match. Let's compare tennis to baseball, Nintendo's first sports game. Baseball has chunky, squat guys who run around with the pace of a turtle. The game is slow and unresponsive. Tennis, on the other hand, well, just look at how nicely defined the characters are. They're more representative of human beings than anything we've seen on the system so far. Look at the way they zip around the court. It makes them feel more like athletes than their counterparts in baseball. And then there's the presentation. Most tennis games to this point had presented the court as a rectangle with a flat overhead view. Nintendo's tennis gives us perspective. We have an angled view of the court as though we're a spectator. The ball shrinking and growing as it goes between foreground and background defines its position in 3D space better than any tennis game before. And I'm going to let you know a little secret here. That is actually pretty hard to do. Remember that in 1983 all of this was being coded in assembly. Direct instructions to the CPU. So in order to display this perspective and have it play correctly, they had to program a curved path for that ball as it traveled up and down across the net. and do that in such a way that the perspective is maintained. These days there's easy solutions pre-built for that kind of thing, but when this was being coded in 1983, there wasn't any option like that. Tennis was the second Famicom game coded by Intelligent Systems. The first was Mario Brothers, and unfortunately a result of trying to make one of these videos a day is that I can't easily go back to fix mistakes when I overlook something. Intelligent Systems was one of Nintendo's two go-to developers for creating works for hire in the early days of the Famicom. Let's get back to talking about that amazing ball programming, though. They also added a shadow underneath the ball that grew and shrank in order to help keep it focused in 3D space. It's an innovation that baseball desperately needed. Tennis is, naturally enough, structured as a tennis match. The first player to win 6 games wins the set, and best 2 out of 3 sets wins the match. The scoring can be a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with the rules of tennis. Scoring goes 0, 15, 30, 40. If a player is at 40 points and the other player is not, then the next point is the game point for the win. If both players have 40 points, then play continues until one player scores 2 points in a row. That is something that can make a game of tennis go on for a very long time. The player always serves first in Nintendo's tennis, and when the opponent returns it, they can either smash the ball or lob it across the net. Your position around the ball matters too. Standing on the left or right hand side will affect what direction it goes when you strike it. If the player wins their first match, they go on to a second match at the next higher difficulty level. And if they win that one, then they win the game. Players can select 5 difficulty levels at first. The 6th level is actually reachable by beating the 5th level. Visually, the only difference is the color of shirt that the opponent is wearing. In terms of gameplay, the computer opponent gets a little bit better, but the real difference is that the game speeds up a lot. Level 5 is visibly faster than level 1. And that's tennis. It was not only the best version of tennis available for any console to that point, it was a quantum leap forward ahead of everyone else. More than Donkey Kong or Mario Brothers, which were just ports of games that were also being ported to other systems, tennis demonstrated how effective Nintendo could be in the console market. And sales bore that out. Tennis sold over 1.5 million copies, making it the 14th best-selling Famicom game of all time. Tennis got its re-releases too, in the Silver Line with the picture art, and a Famicom Disk System release. And a port of it was one of the very first Game Boy games. No conversation about Nintendo's tennis is complete without mentioning the Line Man. There's Mario taking up his spot as Nintendo's mascot. This is our 10th Famicom game and Mario's 4th appearance in them. I think that character might have some legs. I love pinball. I'm not a pinball wizard, but I'm decent at it. I like how pinball takes a basic rule of don't let the ball go down the hole and spins it out into a million different ways. Video pinball tends to be a bit more dicey. It's really easy to get the physics wrong and make the game feel unresponsive or worse, random. In fact, I'd say nobody got video pinball exactly right until the Pro Pinball series of computer games in the late 90s. Which doesn't mean that the games before that were awful, just that they really needed to offer something other than realistic pinball action. Could have been the quality of the tables, or the spectacle of the play. They just needed something more than flicking the ball up into a bumper. Nintendo's pinball entered a kind of barren scene. As far as I can tell, there was no previous pinball video game released in Japan. Atari and Intellivision had made video pinball games, but they weren't very good. The extremely popular Pinball Construction set had been released in 1983, but that's a computer game, so we're not going to talk about it. Nintendo's pinball is something I'd put down as a good attempt that falls down mainly because the rules of the genre were still being figured out. It's not the worst pinball game on the Famicom by far. An important note here is that Pinball is the first game that HAL Laboratories worked on for Nintendo. They're not really a developer on it. Nintendo did all the design of this one in-house and then fell behind schedule with the programming, so HAL was brought in to wrap it up. It won't be long, though, before they're doing their own game development for the Famicom. And they quickly become a solid publisher in their own right, at least until a disastrous misstep in the late days of the Famicom. But that's a story for episode 835. So let's dig into pinball. A television screen doesn't match the dimensions of a pinball table very well, so what Nintendo did was split the play field in half. They gave each their own set of flippers, an outline connects both of them, and to get back up, there's a few hidden tricks. It is possible to shoot the ball up to the top half once it's fallen down, but it's pretty difficult. The easiest method to get back up is to shoot this hole over here, which takes you to the bonus stage. When you exit the bonus stage, you wind up coming out on the top side. Alternatively, you can hit all 7 drop targets on the left-hand side, and that opens up a path to the launch ramp. The path only stays open until you go over one of the rollovers in the flipper lane, so it winds up not being as useful as you might imagine. Let's split this conversation in half to match the table, and start by talking about the top play area. There's no skill shot when you launch the ball, so the most you can do is hope to get that 1,000-point rollover. The rollovers don't activate any light-up target either, so there's no additional bonus that's being gained up there. Shooting into the lane on the right triggers the slot machine game. The slot machine flashes between Penguin, 7, and 3. You have to have all 3 symbols matched to get any points for it. 3 penguins net you 1,000 points, 3 threes get you 3,330 points, and 3 sevens get you 7,770 points. The penguins occur more often than any other symbol on that slot machine, and it's actually pretty tricky to get points off of it. Each of the dots on the left ramp are 100 points, and they don't come back until the ball rolls up through the top of it. Getting to the top of the ramp triggers the seals bouncing some balls, which get 100 points every time they bounce. The ramp is also tied to the target on the left-hand side. Each time you hit it, the value increases by 100 points until it reaches 1,000 points. The value resets when you complete the ramp. The drop targets on the left-hand side are the most boring of these. They're worth 100 points each, and completing the set is 1,000 points. They don't trigger anything special. Moving down to the lower play field, the most important thing down there are the eggs. Hitting them once hatches them into chicks. Hitting the chick just makes that spot blank. Hitting that blank spot returns it to be an egg. Get 3 chicks there, and bumpers appear in the outlanes. They'll send the ball bouncing back if it rolls out that way. The cards at the top are also important, but much more difficult to collect. Completing all 5 rollover targets there adds a blocker in the middle between the flippers to prevent the ball from rolling out. It also changes the color of the lower play field. So that's the table, and as a whole, it really isn't that great. It feels like a basic early 70s design rather than something from the 1980s. Bumpers in the middle and lanes on the side are pretty much the most basic table layout possible. While they implemented some table features to be more video game-like, such as the kickback in the outlanes, they don't feel like a good use of the medium, either pinball or video game. The best feature that they implement is the bonus stage, in which they actually give up on the pinball concept in general. On the bonus stage, Mario walks back and forth carrying a girder above his head to keep the ball bouncing. When the ball rolls over a number, it changes its color. Make a column be the same color, and the floor up top shrinks a little bit. Eventually a hole will open up and Lady will fall through. Mario then has to catch her and get her to one of the exits on the side. If Mario lets Lady fall, that counts as a lost ball. However, if the ball goes out on its own, then it just returns to play. Another feature of pinball is that when you reach 100,000 points, your flippers disappear. You have to play the game with invisible flippers until 150,000 points, when they reappear, and then they stay around for the rest of the game. As for how it plays as pinball, well, you'll never mistake it for the real thing. The ball doesn't react like a real ball does. It's got a bit too much bounce to it. But the physics are pretty consistent, which is more than I can say for some pinball games. There are random elements that come in when the ball bounces, and you can see that as it jiggles off certain targets. There's no way to nudge the table in pinball, so you're completely at the mercy of those rebounds. You can mitigate that with some skill, always taking safe shots and playing conservatively. But that random element will ensure that sometimes you just have to take a bad shot. And on occasion a ball will drain and you have no control over it. Pinball never got a picture cart re-release like some other games in the Pulse Line series. It did get a Famicom disk system re-release, though. And it even got taken back to the arcades. Why you'd choose to play it when a real pinball machine is right there, I don't know, but it was an option. And of course, this isn't HAL's last pinball game. They'll go on to make several more for the Famicom and Game Boy. I find pinball to be a historically interesting relic, but not a game that I really like going back to. It was only good when it was released in comparison to what was available. Times have moved on, and pinball is best left in the past. Something I've learned at this point in trying to produce one of these videos a day is to stop making videos with such long introductions. Unfortunately, there's no way around that with Wild Gunman. There's a lengthy prehistory to the game that has to be talked about before I can talk about the game itself. And given that Wild Gunman is such a simple game, it's very likely that this preamble is going to take longer than describing the game itself. In the beginning, there was a successful toy company called Nintendo, and their star engineer Gunpei Yokoi had the idea to make a gun that shot light instead of bullets, and there would be targets that responded to that light. They made several toys based on this idea, and then decided to take it to arcades. One of these games was an electromechanical game that played video clips of actors in American frontier garb. Players would have to try to outdraw the actor on screen and gun them down before they got taken out. That was Wild Gunman's first incarnation. Nintendo continued the Western-themed light gun toys with a cowboy that would fall down when shot. It was pretty expensive, though. It cost 7,500 yen, or the equivalent of $130 today. And then Gunpei Yokoi made the Famicom. He hadn't given up on the light gun concept, although to work with televisions it would now have to look for a light rather than shoot a beam of light. And so less than a year after launch, the Nintendo Kosenju, or ray gun, was released. It looked like an old-fashioned Colt revolver and came with a holster that kids could strap to their leg. The original packaging for it just called it Gun, and it came with Wild Gunman at first. Later on, it could be purchased separately. Nintendo made 3 games that took advantage of the light gun, all released in the space of a few months, and then it just went away. There probably wouldn't have been any more Famicom games that supported it, except it turns out the light gun was extremely popular in the United States. There aren't a lot more Famicom light gun games, and one of them came with its own custom light gun. In the end, there's a total of 6, plus the one additional one that may have light gun support. I still have to try it. I have some more things to say about the light gun on the Famicom, but let's save that for the next video. Wild Gunman plays similarly to its predecessor. The game is definitely supposed to be a quick draw competition. Players are supposed to put their gun back in their holster and wait for the enemies to march onto the screen and then say, "Fire!" That wasn't the sharpest voice sample ever, but it was certainly a first one for the Famicom. If they can draw and shoot in the time limit given, they take out the enemy. Otherwise, they get hit themselves and lose one life. Firing too early also loses a life. The thing is, if you're playing the game with a NES zapper like I am, there is no holster. So I'm about 5 feet back from my 12-inch television that I use to record these videos. My gun drawn and aimed center screen, and I pretty much cannot lose unless I get distracted. Playing Wild Gunman has shown me that I'm getting old. I used to be able to consistently shoot .22 seconds, but I only managed to pull it off once this time. The enemies start with a time limit around 1.5 seconds, which fluctuates a bit and drifts downward, but the fastest enemy draws in .4 seconds. Even when I'm juggling something else, I can typically pull in under .4. I played for 30 rounds to see if the time limit would get any lower, and it didn't. I basically had to throw the game to get it to stop. Game B ups the ante a bit by adding a second outlaw. Now they enter the screen from both sides, and you have to shoot them in turn. Often they'll say fire at the same time, but sometimes only one of them will say fire. You'll also probably want to prioritize for the outlaw that has the lower time limit. And here, you actually have to aim even if you aren't using the holster. Game C is the most interesting of the 3 modes. In this game, you're just waiting for outlaws to emerge from the doors or a window to shoot them. There are no innocent civilians that you could accidentally hit. It's just the outlaws. This mode adds a wrinkle of limited ammunition for the player to complete the round with. Miss too many times and you'll get a game over. Because I'm playing in such a narrow, confined space, I wound up having to cover one of my eyes and hold the gun up close to my face in order to be able to play. Not the ideal method, but it worked to get the video. In all 3 modes, the game just loops forever, letting the player rack up score indefinitely. If you're fast on the trigger, you really can just play forever in these games. Oddly enough, the light gun games did get re-releases. The originals are the purple boxes, while the re-releases are in a silver box and a little logo that says Video Shooting with Kosenju series written underneath that. And on the subject of packaging, this is our first non-pulse line game. Wild Gunman is a bit of a throwback to the arcades of the 1970s and Nintendo's electromechanical light gun games. The only skill involved is a fast trigger finger. It's a historical footnote bridging shooting galleries and more advanced light gun games. When you think of Nintendo light gun games, one game comes to mind, and that's Duck Hunt. Thanks to being the pack-in with any system that came with a light gun, Duck Hunt was ubiquitous. At least in the United States. In Japan, Duck Hunt is the obscure second game for a failed peripheral. Wild Gunman was the initial pack-in with the gun. Duck Hunt was just the later option. But Wild Gunman was barely a tech demo. Duck Hunt is where the peripheral started to show its ability. No longer are players gunning down stationary targets that slowly trudge out or pop out from behind a window. The ducks in Duck Hunt are active, they move fast, and they're smaller targets. The game starts out simple enough. You only have to shoot 6 ducks in Game A to get a passing score. But with every 10 rounds, the requirement creeps up 1 until you have to play perfectly to pass. The ducks get faster, too. They zip around the screen at high speed taking less time before they fly away. Another complication for players is that there's limited ammo. You only have 3 shots before the ducks leave. And then there's that dog. I'm not sure if there is a previous game where an in-game character gives you feedback on how you're performing, but everybody hates how that dog laughs at you when you miss the ducks. Perhaps the worst kept secret in video games is that Duck Hunt is a 2-player game. In Mode A, the second player can grab a controller and guide the duck around the screen. Pressing a direction changes the duck's direction immediately, although the duck will still change direction on its own if it reaches the edge of a screen or after a short period. On the Famicom, this is done with Player 1 controller since the light gun is plugged into the expansion port. While revealing this inevitably blows somebody's mind, it's in the manual. Both the US and Japanese manual. Nobody reads the manual, you say? Well, that's okay, since they show off the 2-player functionality in the commercial for the game. If there's one major problem with Duck Hunt, it's that Game A is slow. It takes about 10 to 15 seconds for each duck to fly up, get shot, fall down, the dog to pick it up. It actually makes Mode A pretty exhausting to play, as each round takes over a minute, and it could be until round 15 or 20 before you're actually challenged. Game B is a better choice for just playing. With 2 ducks and only 3 bullets, you can only miss once. Multiple ducks both make the game go faster and make the challenge ramp up more quickly. Unfortunately, Game B is just single player. No one else can control the ducks in this mode. Before going on, let me describe quickly how the light gun works. When the trigger is pulled, the Famicom blacks out the screen for a moment. Then white squares appear around all the targets on the screen. The timing of the appearance of the white square determines which target is being shot at. A photoreceptor in the gun detects the light, and from there the Famicom can work out what's been hit. This is why aiming the zapper at a light bulb would work to register hits. And the change in timing due to digital processing with modern televisions is why it only works on old CRT televisions. Game C is my least favorite of the 3 modes. 2 clay pigeons get fired simultaneously, and you have quite a while in which to hit them. The targets do get smaller over time, but it never really feels challenging. I recall a few days after we got our Nintendo, watching my younger brother play over 50 rounds of the clay shooting. And no, he wasn't aiming at a light bulb or having the gun up to the screen either. It's obvious when you compare Duck Hunt to Wild Gunman and Hogan's Alley why Nintendo chose it to be the pack-in in the United States. It's the one that actually feels like a full-featured quality game. This is another case of Nintendo building on its past, too. Just like Wild Gunman was based on an electromechanical game, so is Duck Hunt. In the late 70s, Nintendo sold a Duck Hunt game that consisted of a projector that flashed duck outlines on the wall for players to shoot at. And the Clay Pigeon mode was based on a clay pigeon shooting arcade game that Nintendo made. There's one more light gun game to go, but we do have one release that's squeezed in before it. In 1983, Mahjong may have been king of the Famicom, but it's 1984 now. The king is dead, long live the king. The 5th best-selling Famicom game of all time, with just shy of 2.5 million copies sold in Japan. Golf as a sport is synonymous with business, and Japan in the 1980s was synonymous with business. It was a case of the right game at the right time for a massive hit. Golf was the first full collaboration between Nintendo and HAL. Shigeru Miyamoto did the basic design principles for the game, but HAL's programmer Satoru Iwata did the actual heavy lifting on this one. Enough preamble, let's get to the game. Golf gives the player a full 18-hole golf course to go around, Even though I haven't played all of the console golf games through 1984, I feel pretty confident saying that golf was very innovative in its day. It has a full weather system, good simulation of the clubs, close-ups on the greens which have different elevations. The really special thing is the swing mechanic. Press a button once to start the backswing, hit the button where you want it to stop, hit the button again for when you want to strike the ball. Dead on and it flies straight, a little bit early and it shanks to the right, a little bit late and it swerves to the left. It gives the player some fine control over where the ball goes. And that's needed because if there's one major misstep in golf, it's that you can't really aim the swing. Your shot starts facing the hole, but then it can only be aimed in 8 directions. There is no fine aim adjustment to help you account for the wind. You have to use the spin on the shot to control that. As a course, golf is actually kind of tricky. The trees are out of bounds, not rough, so there's a lot of holes where you have to shoot around the course. You won't just be able to power through. And there is no caddy in golf. You won't know how far from the pin you are, so you'll have to learn your clubs. Another real problem with golf is that it's very hard to chip. The gentlest tap with the wedge sends the ball flying. Getting onto the green when you're just short of it is a very difficult task. On the green itself, I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. All of the greens have a consistent slope in one direction. It's not especially realistic, but I understand why they needed to do that in 1984. About that golfer. People often say that he's Mario, but that's not accurate. There's no mention in the manual of him being Mario, and Japanese sources contemporary with the game say that he's not Mario. Golf happens to be one of the Famicom games that I own the strategy guide for. Number 5 in the Game-Winning Strategies series covered some of Nintendo's early sports games, soccer, golf, and baseball. I didn't talk about it with baseball because the baseball section's pretty boring. This guidebook lays out the course and paths that players can take to shoot through it for a low score. Famicom guidebooks are kind of a neat thing, though they're a bit tough to obtain in the United States. And hey, their drawing of the golfer doesn't look like Mario at all. As one of the Famicom's monster hits, golf casts a long shadow. Of course, it got the picture label re-release, a Famicom Disk System port, and then there were 2 sequels on the Famicom Disk System. A Game Boy port smashed all 3 of those together into one game. HAL developed all of Nintendo's golf games up to the Nintendo 64 era, and they even published their own golf games. The golf legacy extends even further. The course in Wii Sports is the original one from Golf. And the Famicom Golf was even hidden in the original BIOS for the Switch. As for the Famicom Golf, I'd say it's about 80% of the way to a modern golf game. It's an enormous leap forward over the golf games that preceded it. But it's missing a few key things that prevent it from being really playable today. This one's a case of great in its day, but time has passed it by. When I set out my initial mandate for Famidaily, I decided I wasn't going to cover the non-games. But it turns out I had a lot of things in my list that weren't games, and didn't realize it, and I skipped over a few things that really should have counted. And so occasionally I've been going back to fill in those gaps. And in the case of Family Basic, I thought I was just going to be filling in a non-game. Turns out that this is a lot more complicated topic than that. Family Basic takes us back to the fundamental concept of the Famicom, a family computer. And throughout the Famicom's lifetime, Nintendo occasionally explored other options, like the online service, or the sweater patterns. Their very first attempt to expand the Famicom, though, was Family Basic. a tool to let people write their own Famicom programs. BASIC, for those people fortunate enough to not be familiar with the concept, was designed as a programming language for beginners. And so throughout the 80s, you had a lot of computers, and even game consoles, that offered versions of BASIC. I cut my teeth on Commodore 64 BASIC, for example. But even by 1980, it was really obvious that BASIC was a bad tool for teaching how to program. The structure encouraged some bad programming habits, and it was pretty clunky compared to something like C. That didn't stop schools from teaching it to elementary school students, though. That's the environment Family Basic was released in. And Nintendo released a lot of versions of Family Basic. The initial one was for a special version of the Famicom that Sharp made. Sharp was in a partnership with Nintendo in the early 80s, and they made a few different special variations of the Famicom, and this one seems to be especially rare. Nintendo made their own version of the keyboard and cartridge, and released that as Family Basic. Hudson, who was also partnering with Nintendo a lot in those early days, made the language, and it turns out that in that initial release there were quite a few bugs. Nintendo quickly recalled it, and so version 1.0 of Family Basic is actually kind of rare. The most common version, which is what I have, is version 2.0a. There's also a version 2.1 that corrects one command in this, but Nintendo only sent that out to people who requested it as a warranty repair. So that one's also a bit hard to find. About a year later, Family Basic version 3 is released to store shelves, and since that was a commercial release, I'll be covering it on its own video. In the box for Family Basic, you get the cartridge, a keyboard, and a really thick manual. I'm going to go through these in turn. The thing you're going to notice on the cartridge is that there's an on-off switch. The cartridge takes two AA batteries, and when the switch is on, memory is persistent. You can turn off the power to the Famicom, take the cartridge out, take it over to a friend's house, put it in again, and there's your program. If you wanted something more permanent than that, then the keyboard had the answer. The keyboard is modeled off of the terminal keyboards of the time, and while it is a QWERTY keyboard, it's not a proper Japanese keyboard. It only has katakana, and they're not arranged in an order that's used with modern Japanese keyboards. You'll also notice that a lot of the symbols aren't placed on the same keys that you might be familiar with. The back of the keyboard has a very useful feature. Two 3.5mm jacks marked Write and Read. This is what Family Basic uses for loading and saving programs. The Famicom data recorder was just a regular cassette player, and you'd plug a line from the headphone jack on the cassette recorder to the read port on the computer, and a line from the microphone jack on the cassette recorder to the write port on the computer. Family Basic only works if you have the keyboard plugged in. It just won't do anything if it doesn't detect it. When you have the keyboard plugged in and you power on, you first get a very lengthy introduction sequence. You have to hit the space bar to have it start talking to you. Then you're required to enter your name, and then it talks to you for a bit more before you can say, yes, you would like to go into Family Basic. There are two different modes for Family Basic. A programming mode where you just type in your commands, and the background graphics mode. In the background graphics mode, you can lay out an image on the screen. You use the arrow keys to move the cursor, insert and delete to select between the tiles at the bottom of the screen, while the clear and home key cycle through which tiles you're looking at. Return cycles the palette, and the spacebar places the graphic. You hit the escape key to bring up a menu, and here you use space to select. Hitting the stop key here returns you to the main menu. So why does Family Basic need this elaborate graphic drawing system? Well, that's because the purpose of Family Basic is to make games. And I cannot understate how significant that is. The version of BASIC that you'd find on other computers rarely let you have access to a lot of the functions that were good for games. Want to draw a sprite? Make sound effects? Have your user control something with a joystick? Well, you can't do that. Computers are for serious work. Sometimes you might be able to do something, but they wouldn't make it easy. That is the exact opposite of how Family Basic worked. The giant guide they had walks you through the programming language, and the very first lesson that they give you is how to get Mario to appear on the screen. Then they teach you how to make Mario move using the joypad. And then they show you how the sound system in the Famicom works. The goal in Family Basic wasn't to let people print out their tax return, it was to let them make little games. And one of the things that they did to encourage this was to release some games written in BASIC on cassette. There were a few of these in Japan, a few books on how to use Family Basic that came with a cassette of the programs in them, but those weren't officially licensed. Hudson, on the other hand, released 3 cassettes with games, and those are official releases. None of the games are especially complex. They are, after all, partially intended to demonstrate the abilities of Family Basic for people. But some of the things on those cassettes were ports of computer games that they made. Volume 1 of the cassette releases is just games for the first version of Family Basic. Volume 2 had game tips by Takahashi Meijin on Side A, and one game on Side B titled Saikoro Game. The third release from Hudson came on 2 cassettes, one of which was a 99-level expansion for Lode Runner, and the other had a mix of programs for Family Basic version 2 and Family Basic version 3. Since I'm going to make a separate video on version 3, I'm going to save that cassette for next time. But that's not the end of it. An enormous hobbyist community built up around Family Basic, and they kept working with it for a decade after its release. Often, their games would be shared through magazines that they'd send their programs to. And the biggest of these magazines was Famicom Basic. As it turns out, while I was recording this episode, over 100 issues of the magazine were uploaded to the Internet Archive. There's a preservation effort that's now ongoing to get some of these Family Basic games stored for posterity. You can find them over at Gaming Alexandria. While I was working with Family Basic, I was reminded a lot why the bad old days are the bad old days. Getting anything to run on Family Basic was a challenge. You'd think it'd be as easy as connecting a computer's audio out to the Famicom's audio in, but I encountered bad media, incompatible file formats, and the analog circuits in the keyboard are not very well shielded. I spent a lot of time poking at Family Basic, trying to get a strong enough grasp to be able to write a basic game myself, and realized that if I wanted to do anything, it would take me probably about a week and a half to learn it well enough to do so. A week and a half learning Family Basic where I might be able to get in 50 lines of code, or if I really wanted to spend that time making a game for the Famicom, I could refresh myself on 6502 assembly. And a lot of the more interesting Family Basic programs are for Family Basic 3.0 only. This version of Family Basic is a really interesting historical curiosity, and a weird cultural touchpoint for Japanese computer nerds, but probably not something that you'd want to actually use. It's the end of the line for Nintendo's Kosenju, or light gun series. Although Nintendo would produce one more light gun game, Gumshoe was never released on the Famicom. We've had the static figures of the Wild Gunman game who stand there and say fire, and the hyperactive ducks of Duck Hunt. Which of those two will Hogan's Alley be like? And the answer is actually kind of in the middle. The title should give you a clue. Hogan's Alley is the term for a law enforcement firearms training course where cardboard standees would pop out of locations. The FBI's is the most famous, although theirs wasn't built until 1987. The game Hogan's Alley reflects these training facilities. In Game A, players have the viewpoint of a firing range where 3 targets trundle in from the left, reveal who they are, and then have a short period of time to shoot any of the bad guys. There's 3 gangsters, a cop, a professor, and a lady. The cop and the professor in particular have color schemes that look very similar to 2 of the gangsters. So an itchy trigger finger may wind up taking one of them out by mistake. The time limit's a lot more aggressive in Hogan's Alley than it is in Wild Gunman, probably due to not assuming that players will be holstering their firearm in between rounds. It's not just one gangster either. When the targets flip, they may reveal 2, making that time limit even tighter. The sharpshooter bonus is given if the player can clear 3 rounds without any misses. The player is allowed to miss 10 times before they get a game over. Game A winds up being a lot more difficult than the similar mode in Wild Gunman. Between multiple targets, innocent bystanders, and a more strict time limit, Hogan's Alley actually presents a bit of a challenge. Game B takes us to something that more closely resembles the actual Hogan's Alley. We're given a cityscape, and the targets slide in and reveal what they are. So it's very similar to Game A, it just places it in a more natural environment. Something to note about Game B is that it's a first on the Famicom. This is the first time that we've seen scrolling. Smooth scrolling was the big advantage that the Famicom had over its competitors. This doesn't seem like much, but when you compare it to other game consoles in 1984, it's pretty big. There's one more first about Game B. It's the first time that we see new levels indicated by a palette shift. That's a technique that will become depressingly common as we go on. Finally, we have my favorite mode in this game, Game C, Trick Shooting. A series of cans are launched from the left-hand side, and you have to shoot them to bounce them up into the air. You get points for shooting them into the slots on the left-hand side or making it land on that little platform. If a can drops off the bottom, then it's a miss. Shots knock the cans up and to the left. Striking the bricks can bounce the can back to the right. And in that bottom slot worth 5,000 points, you can often find yourself bouncing up and into the bricks and back out again, over and over. Of the 3 modes, this is the one that feels the most like a fully realized game. I'm out of things to talk about with Hogan's Alley, since it is such a simple game. So let me talk for a moment about how I'm playing the game. The NES Zapper does not work with the Famicom, even the AV Famicom that I use to get this footage. That said, the wiring for the Famicom light gun and the NES Zapper is very similar. There's just a voltage, ground, and 2 signal wires. So I got a replacement 15-pin cable, a full 7-pin extension cable, and I spliced those 2 together. And that's Hogan's Alley. Short video, but we're in the era of short games. I don't see anyone really having a burning need to go back and revisit this one. With this, we've come to the end of the Kosenju series. Farewell, light gun games. We'll meet again sometime. I'm going to say something controversial here. I love Donkey Kong 3. It's like Nintendo was trying to make a sequel to Galaxian, but decided to make it part of the Donkey Kong series. And it combines that shooting with base defense like you find in Missile Command. It's one of my favorite games to play at the local arcade. And that makes the Famicom version kind of disappointing. In Donkey Kong 3, Stanley has a problem. Donkey Kong has invaded his greenhouse for some reason, and has teamed up with bees for some reason. Donkey Kong wakes up the bees and slowly descends the vines that he's hanging on to. Stanley is armed with a bug sprayer that he can use to take out the bees that are trying to steal his flowers and push Donkey Kong back up those vines. If Donkey Kong reaches the top of the screen, then the game moves on to the next stage. If Stanley's hit by something or Donkey Kong falls off a vine, he loses a life. Oddly enough, you do not lose a life if all your plants are stolen. That only affects the bonus. Unfortunately, Stanley's bug sprayer isn't very good. It's got a pretty limited range, so he'll need to bounce up platforms and jump up to spray Donkey Kong up at the top of the screen. On some of the vines, there's a super sprayer that has unlimited range. Stanley will have to push Donkey Kong up to knock that sprayer off. A strange thing about the super sprayer is that it persists between levels. There's a time limit for its use. And so if you move very quickly, you can use it to clear multiple stages. The sprayer comes back when the player loses a life, so it's not uncommon to lose a life as things get more hectic, and then be able to zip through a stage because the sprayer is back. There isn't a huge variety to the enemies in this game. The buzzbees are the common enemies. They swirl around the hive and eventually come down to pick up flowers. Vespies are the larger bees. They take multiple hits to destroy, and when they get killed, they explode into a shower of fragments that can kill Stanley. Stay directly underneath them to avoid that attack. The creatively named attackers look like mosquitoes. They aggressively go after Stanley. The attackers get a bit of a makeover starting at level 12, but they still have the same pattern. The worst enemies are the creepies. They look like caterpillars and descend on the vines. They can't be beaten by the normal spray and instead block your shots as they move back and forth on the platforms they reach. Worst of all, if you do spray them as they're on a platform, they get stunned and stay in place for a few moments. The best way to deal with them is to push them back before they get onto the platforms with a spray, but the super spray can also destroy them. There's 3 different boards, but not a whole lot of difference in how they play. The blue tiers are the most basic one, with crawlies coming down the sides, and an easy straight shot up to Donkey Kong. The red girders have a gap in the middle that you have to maneuver around. That makes it a lot harder to get up to Donkey Kong, but it's not that much different from the blue. The third stage has vines going the whole way across for the crawlies, and the Donkey Kong vines are much shorter. Beating this stage is the victory, as Donkey Kong's head goes into the beehive. The game's music is another first for the Famicom platform. It's an extended riff on Flight of the Bumblebee. Adapting classical music into a game's soundtrack is going to come up surprisingly often in the Famicom. Donkey Kong 3 is also a last for the Famicom. This is the last time we're going to see a Nintendo arcade game ported to the system. There is one more game coming that will share the same title as an arcade game that Nintendo made, but it's so radically different from that game that I can't really call it a port. The reason for Donkey Kong 3 being the end of the line for Nintendo's arcade ports is obvious. Donkey Kong 3 was released to the arcades in October 1983, right when the Famicom was taking off like a rocket. Nintendo's arcade division would persist for a while, but now they were the ones following the Famicom rather than the other way around. By all accounts, Donkey Kong 3 was a bit of a failure for Nintendo, and it effectively killed the Donkey Kong brand for 10 years. It didn't get a picture cart re-release, and no new Donkey Kong game would be released until the Game Boy. It's hard to put my finger on why I find the Famicom version of Donkey Kong 3 so disappointing. I feel like it might be the slower pace of the Famicom version. The squashed play area in the home version doesn't help either. Game B does the same thing that you see in other early Famicom games, where it just starts you one loop further in, but one loop in still isn't as frantic as the arcade system. Donkey Kong 3 came out at the exact wrong moment. It's a single-screen shooter along the lines of Galaxian or Space Invaders in an era when arcade games were becoming more complex. So despite its qualities, it's become an overlooked chapter in Nintendo's history. I can already hear those comments now. You've got the order all wrong. Nuts and Milk was the first third-party Famicom game, and it was released July 28th. Lode Runner was released 3 days later on July 31st. And I'm not surprised that a lot of people think that. I certainly did until I started doing proper research. You see, every English source on the internet tells you those facts. But those are the English sources. All of the Japanese sources have Nuts and Milk and Lode Runner released on the same day, July 20th. But sources have been wrong before, so let's go to a primary source. Hudson themselves. Lode Runner appears in Hudson Best Collection Volume 2 for the Game Boy Advance, and Nuts and Milk appears in Hudson Best Collection Volume 4 for the Game Boy Advance. And in those games it gives the release date for both of them as July 20th, 1984. So Nuts and Milk was not the sole first third-party Famicom game. So now that we've established that, let's talk about the more interesting of the two, Lode Runner. Developed by Douglas Smith for the Apple II computer originally, Lode Runner is the game that kicked off the action puzzle genre. It was a monster hit on computers, which led to it getting licensed for ports to everything. Nearly simultaneously with the Famicom version, there was an arcade port. Lode Runner has spawned an absolutely enormous series of games. It's actually kind of complicated to know how many Lode Runner games there are because many of the ports feature unique level sets. My estimate is that there's around 40 distinct Lode Runner games. Lode Runner might be the biggest series that flies completely under the radar. Okay, we're over 2 minutes into this video and I haven't even gotten to the game yet, so let's start that. Like the best puzzle games, Lode Runner has simple gameplay that can be expanded into a variety of ways. Here is the runner. Pressing the B button drills a hole on his left. Pressing the A button drills a hole on his right. This only works if there is nothing obstructing him on his left or right. The Lode Runner can climb ladders, shimmy across ropes, and fall a long distance. The Lode Runner's goal is to collect all the gold bars on the stage, at which point a ladder off the top of the screen will appear that he can climb to get out. He's being chased by robots who pursue him in regular, predictable paths. The robots can pick up gold bars as well, and they drop them when they fall. The runner will fall all the way through holes that he drills, but the robots will only fall down one level. Eventually the holes that he drills are filled in, and if a robot's inside one, it gets crushed. Then the robot appears somewhere near the top of the stage again. If you crush enough robots in a stage before collecting the last gold bar, some cherries will appear that you can collect for bonus points. And that's everything you need to know to play Lode Runner. Now here come the complications. The way stages are laid out, you're your own worst enemy in Lode Runner. It can be very easy to drill a hole and find yourself trapped. Should that happen, you can press select to restart the stage. One of the keys to beating Lode Runner stages is opening these paths before you get into those enclosed spaces. The way that the drill works, you'll often have to make stair-step patterns to be able to get everything open. and with those holes closing up in a few seconds, you're on a tight time limit to grab the gold and get out. Another trick that helps is that the runner can cross on top of the robot heads. There's also some trickier bricks. On some stages, some of the bricks aren't actually there and you'll just fall right through them. There's also these solid bricks that you can't drill into at all. The big difference between Famicom Lode Runner and Computer Lode Runner is that Computer Lode Runner restricted the action to a single screen. Every stage in the Famicom Lode Runner is 2 screens wide. The graphics on the Famicom have been stretched. It's easy to see when you compare the levels that have the same layout on both versions. The scrolling on the Famicom isn't the best as it requires you to be very close to the edge of the screen before it moves, but I never really had any problems with running into robots. You're given 5 lives to start, and are given an extra life every time you clear a stage. But it's still really going to be a challenge to get through all 50 stages on just that. That's quite a jump in content given that the most number of unique stages we've seen in a Famicom game so far is 18 in Golf, and 4 in Donkey Kong Jr. if you don't want to count those holes as individual stages. Lode Runner offers a balm to players who don't want to play all 50 in one sitting. Pressing select at any time brings up a stage selection menu. On top of that, on the stage selection screen, if you hold select and press A or B, it increases or decreases the speed of the game. The 2-player mode is just alternating play. Eventually there will be cooperative play in some Lode Runner games, but that's a long ways off from now. Especially intriguing is the edit mode. This is the first time that a console game has let players make their own stages to challenge their friends with. There was no method to save it though, not even to the data recorder. The edit mode also restricts players to a single screen, similar to the original computer game. Early on, Hudson tried to mimic Nintendo's Famicom packaging. The box is very similar to Nintendo's boxes. The cartridge label has a style that resembles the Pulse line a bit. And even though they had the option to manufacture their own cartridge shells, Hudson chose to package their games in standard Famicom cartridges. Something you might notice on the cartridge, though, because this is a game that Hudson licensed from Broderbund, the cartridge has the trademarked Lode Runner logo on it, rather than just Lode Runner in simple text. As for this game's legacy, well, it was a smash hit. There were 1.1 million copies sold in Japan of Lode Runner, which made it the 28th best-selling Famicom game of all time. Lode Runner did get a re-release with a picture label, and that picture label is actually a bit rare. There was one sequel to it, Championship Lode Runner, which we're going to see pretty soon, actually. The other Lode Runner games on 8-bit Nintendo systems are actually from Irem and are based on their arcade game rather than Hudson's version. I actually think Lode Runner holds up pretty well. Yeah, it looks a little simple, but simple helps when you're dealing with an action puzzle game. I still have fun playing it, and my enjoyment of the game has led me to try to collect more Lode Runner games. Of course, those other Lode Runner games often turn out to be disappointments, but that's game collecting for you. See you tomorrow for the other half of the co-first third-party game on the Famicom. Try to say that 3 times fast. Now that I've taken away Nuts and Milk's only real claim to fame, I guess it's time to actually talk about that game. Hudson released it on the same day as Lode Runner, and it didn't have quite the pedigree or success that the other game did. The title and characters come from an existing computer game, but Nuts and Milk for the Famicom is a very different game than Nuts and Milk for the PC-88 or FM7 computers. They were more like Dig Dug, as nuts and milk tunneled through a surface to collect the fruit, and then complete the stage by collecting a heart. The tunnels they dug filled in behind them, so maybe there was a little bit of Lode Runner influence as well. Nuts and Milk on the Famicom is a puzzle platformer where your goal is to collect all the fruit, and then get to the house in the upper left where Milk's girlfriend Yogurt is waiting for him. Nuts is the enemy character in the game, that light green blob. Milk is the pink blob that's running around. So both the hero and the enemies are palette swaps of each other. Milk has a very short hop that he can use to get over nuts or jump up steps. Every stage has a spring as well that can be used to launch the characters. The timing to use the spring, though, is painfully tight. The trickiest aspect of the game are these fences. The game manual calls them ropes, but I think we all know they're really fences. Milk cannot jump while standing on them or climbing them, so you'll often have to fall from them to get around. If you fall too far, Milk gets stunned for a few moments, and Milk does not get up until you press the jump button. A strange aspect to this is that the screen wraps. All of the stages are a single screen, and you can exit them to the left and appear on the right. Nuts' AI, which relentlessly pursues Milk, can't deal with that screen wrap. Using that screen wrap becomes a vital technique to avoiding Nuts. Starting at level 3, there are bonus stages every 5 stages. So that's level 3, 8, 13, and so on. Collect all the fruit and get to Yogurt in the middle to get an extra life. The obstacles on the bonus stages are the fireballs that appear at the edge of the screen. You don't lose a life if you touch one of them, it just ends the bonus stage. There are 50 stages in total in Nuts and Milk, and the most distinctive thing about them is how many of them have extra messages embedded in them, whether it's the level number made into the level, the initials of the programmer. I kind of miss seeing people's initials and names show up in games like that. There's a huge variation in the difficulty of levels, too. Some stages are a snap and only take a try or two to clear, others can stick you for quite a while. The worst ones I found are the ones that require precision jumping. The windows for those jumps are just too precise for it to be fun. Similar to Lode Runner, Hudson has a feature in the game so that players don't have to complete it in one sitting. Pressing select advances to the next level automatically. But if you wanted to continue at stage 42, it could take quite a while to get to that. Every time you press select, it has to wait until the next stage fully loads and starts playing before you can hit select again. There is no actual ending to Nuts and Milk. If you complete all 50 stages of Game A, it just drops you at stage 1 in Game B. Game B adds a few more obstacles with blimps that emerge from the left and helicopters that emerge from the right. They move in kind of a sinusoidal pattern to get in your way. I found that the platforming was a tough enough challenge on its own that I didn't really need the additional obstacles. Similar to Lode Runner, Nuts and Milk includes a level editor. It's more full-featured than Lode Runners, though, because you can create every single stage in the game in that level editor. The levels that you create replace level 1 in Game A or Game B. If you fail to include all of the necessary components, though, you do get an error. All levels that you make must have a fruit that you're able to collect. Nuts must be somewhere on it. You must be able to reach the house. And for some reason, there has to be at least one spring. Fulfill all those conditions, and you can build your masterpiece and share it with your friends. Of course, as before, there's no actual way to save the data in Nuts and Milk, so your levels last as long as you leave the console on. Nuts and Milk is an okay game, but the only thing it was really remembered for is being the first third-party Famicom game, and it has to share that title with the much better Lode Runner. There was a Commodore 64 port of this version that came out in Europe under the title Hot Pop. It did get a sort of sequel. A mobile phone version was released in 2003. That version might be effectively lost, except it was included in Bomberman Land 3 on the PlayStation 2. So if you want more Nuts and Milk, it does exist. Nuts and Milk is a case of a game that was perfectly fine when it was released, but looking back at it almost 40 years on, it just doesn't hold up particularly well. The controls are a bit of a pain, but without that, the game is way too simple. It's a perfectly average Famicom game. This is one I'm going to feel bad about. Galaxian is a game that's a key part of history. It's Namco's first game on the system, and I am going to have almost nothing to say about it. Galaxian's claim to fame was that it was the first color arcade game. It was released in 1979, so it was 5 years old when it came to the Famicom. I'm going to ask you a question. How many Galaxian machines have you seen in the wild? Personally, in a lifetime of going to arcades, I've never seen one, but I expect that some of you have seen one or two. Now, how many Galaga machines have you seen? For me, it's too many to count. That was a ubiquitous machine, even in the early 80s. The thing is, Galaxian was barely one step above Space Invaders. And then Namco released Galaga 2 years later, and it was a sequel that improved every single thing about it. There's no reason to play Galaxian when Galaga exists. And that kind of goes for the Famicom port too. As a first effort from Namco, it's very solid. It's enjoyable, you'll like playing it. But then, with their second release, Namco figured out how to move their arcade games into a home. The revised version was such a step up that there was no reason to go back and look at the original. You could play Famicom Galaxian, but less than 6 months later they released Galaga for the Famicom, and it's much better. Galaxian just winds up being totally overshadowed, stuck between Space Invaders, which it imitated, and Galaga that perfected it. I do appreciate how this game presents its plot in the attract screen. Mission: destroy aliens. We are the Galaxians. And that's really all you need to know. When you start the game, you're presented with a field of bug aliens who dance back and forth left to right, just like Space Invaders, though they don't descend when they reach the edge of the screen. Sometimes an alien will break off from the pack to descend, firing its shots as it swerves at your ship. The player is piloting the Galaxy a spacecraft that can only have one bullet on the screen at a time, and you can tell that you're ready to fire again when it appears at the nose of your ship. The most important aliens from a scoring perspective are those multicolored ones at the back. They'll descend with an escort, and the score that you get for them is determined by how many of the escorts you take out first. Also, hitting that ship pauses the alien attack for 4 seconds. The manual actually gives personalities to all of the aliens, although I don't see it reflected in the game. The green aliens are the combat team, weak minions who have to overcome you with sheer numbers. The purple ones are the sergeants. They're ferocious and vigilant. The red aliens are the escorts, always acting with the captains, despite their inferior attack. And the yellow ones are the captains of the fleet. Key members, and if you destroy them, you weaken the enemy's attack. Personally, I don't see any of that reflected in the game, but I respect the manual author's attempt to give them some personality. Your reward for clearing out a fleet of aliens is to have them appear again and start all over. They'll be a little bit faster and shoot a little bit more, and that's literally everything there is to Galaxian. Galaxian was Namco's first Famicom game, and they gave it a number on the cart. Namco didn't number all of their releases, though. They were the most prolific publisher for the system, with 84 games released. You might notice that the game's publisher is given as Namcot, and that's molded onto the cartridge as well. That's just the name for Namco's home gaming division, and they'll continue to use Namcot into the 90s. Nobody at Namco knows what the T stands for, and a lot of people have attempted to find out over the years, including myself. Galaxian gives us another first. Unlike Hudson, Namco didn't feel beholden to Nintendo's style of packaging, and so their boxes actually have screenshots of the game on them. Their cartridges also don't have cart codes on them. They're one of only 2 publishers who got away with that. Strangely enough, this did get a re-release. In 1990, it was released to the Famicom Disk System as a disk writer-only release. It's one of the last releases for the FDS, and as such, it's pretty rare. Famicom Galaxian is a fine port. It's definitely better than any of the other home ports that were made back then. Namco did switch the game a bit to get it onto home television screens, but it doesn't compromise the game too badly. The real thing that hurts it is that we're only 13 Famicom releases away from a game that improves on it in every way. So far we've seen 4 games that haven't been released in the United States. Gomoku, Mahjong, Popeye no Eigo Asobi, and Galaxian. The thing is, nobody's really disappointed that those weren't released in the US. Devil World, on the other hand, is often pointed to as an example of Nintendo of America's heavy-handed censorship, keeping Americans from getting great games. Nintendo shying away from releasing anything that could have gotten them on the 6 o'clock news might have been the reason that Devil World wasn't released in the US, but at the same time, it's not a good game. We weren't really missing out on a Shigeru Miyamoto masterpiece here. Devil World is an example of the maze chase genre, a style of arcade games that was extremely common in the early 80s, following in the footsteps of Pac-Man. Players wandered a top-down maze trying to fill out a pattern or collect items while being pursued by enemies. Strangely enough, despite there being dozens of these games right at the time when the Famicom's popularity was booming, I can only think of 4 games that really fit the maze chase genre that got released on the platform. There's more single-screen shooters for the Famicom, and that's a genre that was on its way out at the time. Devil World brings 2 twists to the formula. First, to collect the dots in the maze, you have to be carrying a cross. So if it runs out while you're gobbling up a line, you'll have to run back and get another one. These aren't like the power pellets in Pac-Man. They're always there for you to pick up and use. The cross doubles as a weapon, letting you shoot fire at the ghosts that wander the maze. The other major feature of Devil World is the Devil. He stands at the top of the screen and directs his minions to scroll the maze around. If you're at the edge of the screen, it's possible for you to be crushed by the moving walls. Only about a quarter of the maze is accessible at any given moment. To access a lot of things, you'll have to wait until the maze scrolls. And therein lies the single biggest flaw in Devil World. The Devil's actions are totally random. Both the direction and time that's moved is randomized. So you can sit there for a long time watching dots just outside of the area that you can collect, waiting for the devil to eventually scroll back to them. It's boring waiting for a random movement to eventually take you back so that you can play again. This problem is compounded in the second level style, the Bible stages. The Bibles appear in the corner of the play area, and you have to collect them and return them to a central post. The catch is, those corners are where the greatest risk of being crushed by the maze is. And it's possible for a corner to be completely sealed off from you for an extended time. The wait's a little bit more challenging in this stage because the Bibles are what lets you breathe fire to defeat the ghosts. So if there's one last Bible that you have to wait to be accessible, you won't have a way to clear the ghost out. This is a good opportunity to talk about the central theme of Devil World. No, it's not devils or crosses. It's eggs. When you kill the ghosts, they leave an egg behind, and if you consume that egg, it takes them a little bit longer to respawn. The dinosaur you're controlling is named Tamagon, a reference to the Japanese word for egg. Your lives are referred to as eggs, and when you die you come back as an egg that you have to hatch out of once the maze is clear. The final stage style is the bonus stage. There are boxes at the edge of the screen, and one of them has a 1-up egg in it. All you can really do is grab them and take your chances. There's no devil to torment you in the bonus stage. Instead, the maze is moved by running over the arrows in it. If you die on the bonus stage, it does not decrease your life count. There are 3 different maze patterns in Devil World, and you complete each stage once in each pattern before they loop. So starting from round 4 or the 10th pattern, you're back at the first pattern again. There's one more interesting feature of Devil World to talk about: multiplayer. The 2-player mode in this one is not alternating, it's simultaneous. Unlike in Mario Bros. Though, there isn't really a way for players to interfere with each other. It's more of a direct competition for score. And that's really all there is to the gameplay of Devil World. It's an attempt to expand on Pac-Man, but those extensions to the game make it worse. Devil World did get a picture cart re-release, and it's the last of the Pulse Line games to do so. Of course, the reason for that is Nintendo ends the Pulse Line here. The end of the Pulse Line and the introduction of third-party publishers brings a close to the first chapter of the Famicom's history. Now we're entering the Famicom boom, when everyone and their brother tries to start a game company to cash in on the fad. But that's a topic for later. I'm not totally convinced that Devil World wasn't released in the United States over religious concerns. The thing is, those censorship practices weren't really in place until late 1986, maybe early 1987, and so you often find things in early NES games that would have been prohibited later on. And they always could have just changed the crosses in Bibles. There is a NES release of Devil World, but that was in Europe. My thinking is that with limited resources for the US launch, Nintendo chose to drop anything that they considered even remotely marginal. And Devil World as a game just isn't up to Nintendo's standards. Last time I mentioned that we were entering a new chapter of the Famicom's life. Yonnin Uchi Mahjong is a perfect divider for this. It's Nintendo's first game to not have a Pulse label. It's the first sequel to a game made for the Famicom. And it's the first time that we have 3 games released on the same day. It took 16 months for there to be 20 games on the Famicom. The next 8 are all released in November 1984. The Famicom is picking up speed rapidly. I described Yonnin Uchi Mahjong as a sequel to Mahjong, but it didn't really start out that way. Hudson Soft created this game originally for computers, under the title Jonkyo, or John Fan, if you like. The game was a pretty big success on computers, so Nintendo decided to bring it to the Famicom. The major differences between 2 and 4-player Mahjong is that 4-player Mahjong adds special rules for seeding and additional scoring based on that. I find those rules to be the most complicated and confusing part of Mahjong, so I'm not even going to try to summarize them here. The 2 options on the title screen aren't difficulty settings, they're for 2 slightly different rule sets. The one on the left makes it easier to complete one of the simpler yaku, or winning hands. Beyond that, you're still trying to build sets of 3 and runs of 3, and build hands that correspond to specific rules that allow you to go out. I expect most of the Mahjong game videos to be pretty short because they all wind up being extremely similar, and explaining what I know about Mahjong every time would get a bit dull. There are a couple Easter eggs in Yonnin Uchi Mahjong. While you're playing, if you press select, it exposes what tiles are being held in everyone else's hands. The original Jankyo had an option to let you play with open hands so that you could see every action the computer was taking, and this feels like the way that Hudson included that feature on the Famicom. On the title screen, watch the Hudson name as I hit reset. Did you catch it? Let me freeze frame it. M. Tobita is the creator of Jankyo and Yonnin Uchi Mahjong. I think this is the first time we've got an actual credit in a Famicom game. Kiku was the initials of the creator of Nuts and Milk, but not really his full name. Well, I know it's a short video, but that's really all there is to Yonnin Uchi Mahjong. The title translates to a very generic 4-player mahjong, and that's really all the game delivers. It was a big hit for Nintendo, selling just under 1.5 million copies, placing it at the 20th best-selling Famicom game of all time. And much later in the Famicom's life, Nintendo will release a sequel to it called Shin Yonnin Uchi Mahjong, or New 4-Player Mahjong. But as for this one, what worked in 1984 only worked because there was no competition. Even if we just stick to Famicom games, there are over a dozen better Mahjong games that get released on the system. This one's only interesting to Nintendo completionists. This is one of the episodes I find to be intimidating. I started Famidaily because I like the weird and obscure games, and I can make a solid argument that Pac-Man is the most famous arcade game of all time. Pac-Man is a cultural phenomenon whose effect lingers to this day, and it's been studied extensively, or at least the arcade game has. The Famicom game, not so much. Mentioning the Atari 2600 port at this point is punching down, but even the multitudes of unofficial ports to computers that existed in 1984 lost something significant in translation. Namco did the MSX and Famicom ports themselves. They had to scale the games down a little bit, but everything else in these ports is exactly as it should be. I feel almost foolish describing Pac-Man, but this is a show about how these games play. Pac-Man is the tragic story of a drug addict who crawls through a dingy maze pursued by demons of his own making. He gets through each day by consuming every pill he can find. But only the 4 large pills in the corner are enough to let him battle back his ghosts for a brief time. Malnourishment has turned his skin yellow, as the only fruit he eats are those that are discarded in the maze. With the obligatory wacky description of Pac-Man out of the way, how does this version play? The best thing that the Famicom port does is to move the score and lives off to the right. While the monitor in the arcade machine had the same aspect ratio as the home television set, it was rotated on its side. Obviously, they couldn't expect people to do that at home, so by splitting the screen, they gave the play area the correct proportions. Namco is going to continue to use this in home ports of their vertically orientated arcade games. Despite getting the aspect ratio correct, they did have to scale the maze down. The Famicom version has 192 dots in the maze, while the arcade version has 244 dots. However, the Famicom game also crashes at level 256, just like the arcade game does. Over the course of the whole game, that means that the best Famicom score is about 13,000 points lower than the arcade game. But even with those small concessions, the maze layout in Famicom Pac-Man is close enough to the arcade that only experts would notice a difference. There's more to Pac-Man than just eating dots in a maze, though. There were tons of clones in the early 80s that replicated that without actually getting what made Pac-Man special. A hero is nothing without his villains, and what made Pac-Man special was the ghosts. The genius of Pac-Man was in giving each of the ghosts a personality, a set of distinctive rules that they followed for their AI. Those rules were simple, but they led to some interesting emergent behavior. The attract mode breaks down their names and personalities. The red ghost Akabe has the personality of being a stalker. When Akabe is on the hunt, she runs directly toward Pac-Man. Pinky is the ambusher. He's always looking just ahead of where Pac-Man is facing and targets that square. Asuke is mercurial according to the attract mode. In practice, what this means is that this ghost tries to pinch you between itself and Akabe. And finally, Guzuta has been given the personality of playing dumb. This is the least threatening ghost since it really isn't trying to chase Pac-Man down. Instead, Guzuta tries to stay a certain distance away from Pac-Man and maintain that distance. Besides their personalities, the ghosts have another rule that they follow. Each of them has a corner of the maze that they like to patrol. When they leave the ghost house, they'll go there first, and then at certain intervals they'll break off pursuit of Pac-Man and return to those patrol routes. Combine all of that together and you get some interesting emergent behavior. The ghosts feel more distinctive than other video game enemies from 1980 did. One more thing before I move on. 3 of the ghosts are named after colors. Akabe and Asuke have red and blue in their names, respectively. Poor Guzuta is the lone man out, but his name implies hesitancy, and that reflects his given personality. As you advance in rounds, the ghosts get faster and you have less time to eat them when you have devoured your own Energizer. It's not a linear progression, though. There will be stages where you have more time on the Energizer. As the ghost speed increases, using the tunnel becomes more important. The ghosts slow down dramatically as they go down that path, so if you're being closely chased, that's an easy way to get away from them. There's a few more key differences between the Famicom version and the arcade game. The Famicom version corrected several bugs in the arcade game that prevented ghosts from being able to get to certain spots. There are no safe places in the maze for Pac-Man in the Famicom game. It also introduced an AI bug where ghosts switching from the pursuit to patrol patterns may wind up pursuing Pac-Man for a bit longer than they're intended to. All of these changes mean that the arcade patterns that can be used to perfectly clear the stages every time don't work on the Famicom. Famicom Pac-Man is still a deterministic game, so it should be possible to find patterns that allow each stage to be cleared, but I couldn't find any. For the time being, you'll just have to play it normally. Naturally, a game as popular as Pac-Man got a Famicom Disk System re-release. But strangely enough, even though there are many entries in the Pac-Man series that were contemporaneous with the Famicom, only one more Pac-Man game is going to be released for the system. 2 more Pac-Man sequels will be released on the NES in the US by way of Tengen. There would eventually be a 3rd Pac-Man game released for the Famicom by Namco, and that 3rd game was released in 2020. Since it's not a licensed game, it's really not in the scope of this series. In the end, is the Famicom a good system to play Pac-Man on? I'd say yes. We've had better, more perfect arcade ports since then. Of the early Famicom games that Nintendo chose not to release in the US, F1 Race is the only one that I genuinely wonder why they didn't do it. The only driving game Nintendo had in that early NES lineup was Mach Rider, and it really doesn't compare with F1 Race. Of course, Nintendo would eventually publish Square's Highway Star as Rad Racer in the United States, and that's a game that outdoes F1 Race. But in those first few months of the NES's life, Nintendo must have been very restricted in manufacturing if they dropped F1 Race for some of the other games they did. So first off, this game is transparently based on Namco's pole position. I know there's only so many ways that you can present a behind-the-camera race game, but F1 Race really comes close to pole position in presentation. They don't have the qualifying run in Nintendo's game, though. There are 10 tracks total in F1 Race, but you won't see them all when you play the game. On skill level 1, you play tracks 1 through 5. Skill level 2 is tracks 3 through 8, and skill level 3 is tracks 6 through 10. F1 Race is very much an arcade racer. You have the timer ticking down, and every time you cross the starting line, you get a certain amount of time back. Complete the race, and you get an additional amount of time to complete the next race. You'll have to be an excellent driver to complete all 5 races, even on the beginner difficulty. A strange quirk about the courses is that there's 6 different backgrounds, and the background is randomly decided at the start of each race. It's just palette swaps of the scenery, but it gives the game a nice atmosphere. Not all of the backgrounds are equally likely as well. The night and sunset backgrounds don't come up very often, but there's also a desert background that's so rare that in an hour of playing and resetting specifically to try to capture it, I couldn't get it to appear. As I've been editing this video, I have the Famicom sitting next to me, and I've been resetting over and over again trying to get the desert to appear. It's just that rare. I've read a claim that there's a 7th background, a snow scene, but I've never even seen pictures of that one. F1 Race was programmed by everyone's favorite programmer, Satoru Iwata. Shigeru Miyamoto did the design on this one. That programming wasn't perfect, though. F1 Race has some well-known glitches that occur when you hold start and press reset. Pause can appear on any screen, and you'll get a lovely squeal from your television set. I don't believe that this trick works on most emulators since they don't soft reset the way that a Famicom does. But it's really to Iwata's credit that the game looks and plays as smooth as it does. Driving is super responsive, and it honestly feels pretty good for something that's being controlled with a D-pad. The car seems to have a lot more grip than you find in other racing games as well. You can take those curves a lot faster than you might think you could. You'll spin out and lose time if you gun the engine as the race starts. Low gear will accelerate you up to about 200 kilometers per hour. High gear tops out at, well, that's a bit complicated. You see, there's a trick to F1 Race. If you can get the car up to 416 kilometers per hour, then it enters turbo mode. In turbo mode, the top speed increases to 497 kilometers per hour, and the grip improves to the point that you don't skid around corners. But getting to 416 kilometers per hour is almost impossible. Doing anything other than driving straight at full acceleration loses a bit of speed. So you're slowing down when you go around the other cars. Not to mention the problems with corners. I have spent quite a while trying to activate turbo mode. I used course 1, which as an oval gives you the longest straightaways. The corners are gentle enough that you can accelerate pretty well out of them and even get a bit of time into them. The closest I've come is about 408 kilometers per hour. At that point, the speed is ticking up very slowly. I've hunted around for tips on how to do this trick, perhaps a way to get better acceleration, but mainly I found people just saying that it's very hard to do. I did find a tip to help with cornering. You can hold down brake and accelerate at the same time to maximize your grip, but it does reduce the car's speed to 305 kilometers per hour. Because they don't get talked about very often, you might be surprised at how many F1 racing games there are on the Famicom. It was a wildly popular genre in the 80s and early 90s. By my count, there's over 20 games on the Famicom for F1 racing. The popularity of the genre goes on to other platforms too. The PC Engine has piles of F1 racing games. As for Nintendo's F1 Race, there were a pair of nominal sequels on the Famicom Disk System, but they're played from a top-down view and so don't really share a whole lot with this F1 Race. The Game Boy F1 Race, on the other hand, that's a proper sequel with all new tracks and multiplayer support. As for Famicom F1 Race, I really do like it. It's not the best arcade racer on the system, that would probably be Highway Star. But it's one that I'm enjoying playing and trying to get that turbo mode to work for me. As for that desert, at points in this project, I'm going to run into some games that are barely blips on the radar for NES fans, while in Japan they were more significant. In the US, Xevious was a mildly popular arcade game and a solid but not wildly popular NES title. In Japan, Xevious was a cultural phenomenon. Xevious broke shooting games out of the boundary of the single screen and changed the genre forever. One of the very first video game strategy guides ever was written for Xevious by Satoshi Tajiri. Eventually he gave his video game company the same name as his fanzine, Game Freak. There's a generation of Japanese video game developers who played Xevious and decided that's what they want to do. Xevious had further cultural impact than that. The very first album of video game music was for Xevious, and the game's designer Masanobu Endo wrote a novel to give Xevious a backstory. I haven't been able to get a copy of that book myself, but the summaries I've read make it both sound incredibly cliched and totally bonkers. I could go on and on about all the stuff around Xevious, but that's a video for another channel. It's time to start digging into the game itself. Xevious was the game that made vertically scrolling shooters a thing. The player flies the spacecraft Solvolo across the landscape of forests, fields, and roads, fighting against the Gamp invaders. Last long enough, and you'll be attacked by one of their enormous flying saucers, one of the very first bosses in a shooting game. The Solvolo can fire shots straight ahead or bomb the ground just in front of it. Air and ground targets will approach, and you can fly over the ground targets if you don't shoot them. The landscapes that you fly over are kind of neat, because although you view them in one continuous strip, they're actually side by side. And if you cut up the map a bit, you can see the whole thing fits together. The Famicom version is the largest Famicom cart to date. It is 320 kilobits. Almost every other Famicom game so far has been 192 kilobits. I guess that's why they had to charge more for this one. But even with all that extra space to hold the landscapes, they still couldn't quite fit in everything from the arcade. The Nazca lines lie at the end of the desert section in the arcade version, and the Famicom is just a blank field. Another subtle innovation of Xevious? There are two types of enemy fighters. Manned and unmanned. Any craft that the game considers manned will try to avoid hitting the player. One of the more interesting quirks of Xevious is it has scaling difficulty. The better that you play the game, the more challenging the enemies become. They become both more numerous and more aggressive. When you start a new game, they will rarely shoot at you and will kind of leisurely fly in. After a while, though, the craft variety changes and you get things that start firing rapidly and zoom toward you. The difficulty scales down when you die as well, so it gives the game a kind of gentle curve. One of the more infamous enemies in Xevious are these flying rectangles that look almost 3D rendered. The playground story goes that if someone could shoot one of these 256 times, it would explode. This isn't true, and the squares simply don't take damage. Right after you first encounter the squares, you can find another of Xevious's innovations. There's a hidden one-up. If you bomb this water here, the special flag from Rally X appears. Collect it, and you get a one-up. And we're still not done with Xevious' innovations. The Famicom game is one of the first instances of a cheat code. At the title screen, hold down the A button and then press right 9 times, press up twice, press left twice, and then down 9 times. In the upper right hand corner, you'll see a set of numbers appear. You can think of those as dip switches for the game. You select each one by pressing left and right, and change them by pressing the A or B button. The effect of the change occurs when you press reset and start a new game. The rightmost 2 bits grant the players 5 lives when they start the game. The next 2 over set the game to maximum difficulty. The enemies become super aggressive and don't stop coming. If you want a challenge, turn these on. The next 3 change the 1-up system. That doesn't really have a visible effect, so let's move on. The front bit, if it's turned on, the ship is invulnerable. You can drive right through those squares and it doesn't do anything. On Game Center CX, they use this to try to find out what the maximum score in Xevious could be. The arcade locks the score at 9,999,000, but the Famicom version doesn't lock the score at all. For such a simple game, there's a lot to Xevious. As for the legacy, well, Xevious as a cultural phenomenon, of course, would live on, but those kind of spawn out of the arcade game. The Famicom game's legacy, there's a direct sequel to the Famicom game called Super Xevious that we'll see pretty soon, and Xevious got a release in the final days of the Famicom disk system as something you could buy from a Famicom disk system rewriter kiosk. Naturally, the Famicom version was a monster hit, selling 1.25 million copies. It was the game to own for the Famicom in the winter of 1984. Xevious has so much going on around it, I completely forgot to talk about my own reactions to it. It's kind of simple. There are no power-ups to go after. The boss is iconic, but he's the only boss they have. And despite that, I find Xevious to be kind of fun to play. This is easily the most technically impressive Famicom game we've seen so far. It looks sharper and plays faster than anything before it on the system. It's technically impressive too. Besides the smooth scrolling, Xevious really pushes the Famicom sprite hardware. There's a limit of 6 sprites on screen at once, but a lot of the targets are actually background tiles, including the giant flying saucer. The compromises from the arcade version are just a slower scrolling to compensate for the smaller play view on the television set, and a few graphical changes. Xevious feels like it could have been a Famicom game from 1986. The only catch is it is an early game. We're going to see better shooters on the system, but we won't see them for quite a while. Okay, 12,000 years ago there was a super civilization living on Earth, and they built a giant computer called GAMP. In fact, they made multiple copies of GAMP, 6 altogether. GAMP worked out that there was an ice age coming that would kill most of the people on Earth. So he took the people that he liked and moved them to another planet, thinking that it would kill off all the nonconformists. The people who moved with GAMP to a different planet all developed psychic powers, and they tried to use their psychic powers to destroy the remaining people on Earth. In the year 2000, GAMP decides it's time to go back and take over the Earth again. He finds it infested with humans, so they invade and conquer South America. Klaatu and his android girlfriend Eve contact the remaining humans to offer them help in defeating GAMP. It turns out GAMP was built by using the brain of Klaatu's father, and although GAMP is destroyed, it uses its psychic abilities to regenerate itself and enslave all the human beings. Klaatu helps the remaining free humans build a super space fighter capable of destroying the indestructible materials that GAMP builds its spaceships out of. And then they fly off to South America to fight off the enemies and destroy the flying saucer that's going to regenerate GAMP on Earth. Well, they can't all be winners. Urban Champion has a following in Japan, and I've never been able to figure out if it's ironic or sincere. Do they remember fighting with their friends, playing a game unlike anything else available on the Famicom in 1984? Or are they laughing at how Urban Champion misses the mark in nearly every gameplay element? Urban Champion was one of the very few games to get a remake as a 3D classic on the 3DS, so somebody must have been interested enough to port it. But I can't understand why. Urban Champion is a fighting game reduced to its most basic structure. You control the blue-haired guy. He's punching the green-haired guy. Your goal is to knock the opponent all the way back to the edge of the screen. The A button is a light, fast punch. The B button is a haymaker that knocks them over. Pressing up and down switches between high and low attacks. And holding up and down lets you block high and low attacks. Pressing back leans backwards so that you can dodge. The fighters have identical moves, and in subsequent rounds, the green fighter just gets better at blocking and more aggressive in throwing punches. Occasionally someone will interfere with your fight by dropping a flower pot out a window, or the police might pass by, forcing each fighter to the edge of the screen where they act nonchalant until they're gone. Knock an opponent back twice, and a manhole appears at the edge of their screen. Knock the opponent into the manhole to win the fight and be showered with adulation, or get knocked into your manhole to get a game over. If time runs out in a round, the police show up and haul off whichever fighter was closer to the edge of the screen. The stamina meter at the bottom of the screen drops whenever you throw a punch or get hit. If it reaches 0, well, the manual doesn't tell you what happens when it reaches 0. I found a fact that claims that your fighter gets stunned for a second, but I didn't see that myself. As far as I can tell, the stamina reaching 0 doesn't do anything. The combat in Urban Champion also has a problem. A successful hit with a haymaker is worth way more than a successful hit with a standard punch. When the haymaker connects, you get that huge knockback and have time to advance. On top of that, it's possible to time things so that as the enemy approaches, you just hit them with another haymaker. So it's relatively easy to get them into a rhythm where you can just knock them down, step close, knock them down, step close, until they're off the edge of the screen. It is technically possible to beat Urban Champion. Kind of. After 140 rounds, the wins marker in the lower right-hand corner changes to just read Champion. Perhaps the most annoying feature in Urban Champion are the police. Imagine if you were playing Street Fighter 2 and then suddenly someone walks in from the side of the screen and both fighters back off, wait for 10 seconds, and then they're allowed to continue the fight, but the match has been completely reset. Just stopping gameplay would be bad enough, but resetting the match? That's outright bad design. Urban Champion is something of a rarity at this point in the Famicom's lifespan. There are no 8-bit follow-ups or successors to it. Urban Champion was a one and done from Nintendo. I can't complain too hard about that, though. Urban Champion is easily the worst of Nintendo's Famicom games. We will see worse games as we go through the library, but this is the bottom of Nintendo's barrel. Dear Namco in 1984, please stop making excellent Famicom ports of your arcade games that have tremendous depth. There's so much to them, it's hard to make videos about them. Your friend, Random Stranger. Mappy is a game that falls into what I consider to be the second tier of arcade games. It never broke out into the public consciousness, but it was still popular in the arcades themselves. It won't show up in anyone's top 3 arcade games, but it's got a real shot of showing up in the top 10 for a lot of old arcade fans. Similar to Xevious, Namco had to make some compromises bringing this one home to the Famicom. And just like in Xevious, those compromises don't matter a whole lot because the end result is still a fantastic game. Mappy comes out of the maze chase genre that Namco spawned with Pac-Man and Rally X, but it folds it in with the fledgling platformer genre. Mappy is a police mouse who's trying to collect all of the items scattered throughout a house. The name was taken from a robot Namco built for the Micro Mouse maze running competition. Mappy is pursued through the house by Mukis, the pink cats that aggressively chase him down. The red cat's Nyamako. He's the boss of the Mukis, but doesn't necessarily chase Mappy down. Instead, he likes to go after items and hide behind them. If Mappy picks up one of the items that he's hiding behind, you get an extra 1,000 points for that. To get between floors of the house, Mappy has to bounce off a trampoline. While in the air, Mappy and the cats don't run into each other. It's only on the flat surfaces where they can catch you. The trampoline can only take a few bounces before it rips and Mappy falls through. If there's a trampoline below it, Mappy's okay, but if there's a hole or a solid floor below, that costs a life. It can be a real challenge when one of the cats lines up perfectly with Mappy bouncing up and down on the trampoline. If you both get off at the same point, then Mappy will get caught for sure. Hey, all of this sounds like a fine foundation for an early arcade game. But we've barely even started talking about Mappy. How can Mappy deal with Nyamko and the Mukis? Well, the house is filled with doors. Pressing the A or B button opens or closes the door immediately in front of Mappy. The flashing doors emit a pulse when they open, sending out a wave in the direction of the knob. Any cat that gets caught up in that gets pushed all the way off the screen. They'll respawn at the top after a few seconds. But all of the doors are valuable in dealing with the cats. The doors always open in the direction of the knob, and if you open a door that a cat's behind, it can get slammed into the wall. That stuns it for a few seconds, and it'll blink right before it gets up again. If Mappy opens a door toward him, he gets thrown back, and if there's a cat immediately behind them, it can get knocked over in the process. The Mukis are slowed down by the closed doors. They have to stop to open them. And if there's a door right on the edge of a hole, nobody can get off on that floor unless the door is open. They can never open the flashing doors though, so they'll have to turn back at those. Mappy's ability to open and close doors has unlimited range too, so it can be very useful to open doors far ahead of you or close them again across holes. There's 2 more ways that Mappy can deal with the cats. Starting on round 8, bells appear at the top of some of the shafts. Running into the bell drops it down, and any cat that's in the shaft gets knocked out. And starting at round 12, trap doors appear in floors that you can walk on top of, and any cat pursuing you will fall into them and get stunned. That's an awful lot, and I'm still not done talking about Mappy because there's so much going on here. If you take too much time on a stage, you'll get a hurry up message. And then if you take a while longer, an invincible coin appears. The coin is Gozenso-sama, or Ancestor. The ghostly cat is indestructible and will head straight toward Mappy. Honestly, I've found that Gozenso-sama isn't really a threat. Even on the higher stages, I couldn't really run out of time and make it appear. I had to linger a long time on stages just to get that little bit of video footage of it. Now, with all the enemies out of the way, let's talk about the scoring system in Mappy. Would you be surprised if I told you that scoring is complex and has a lot of strategy behind it? There are 10 items placed in the house for each level, and these 10 items always appear in the exact same spots. The layout of the house changes constantly, with different doors and pits and trampolines and access to the attic opening and closing off, but those items will always be in the same spot. Each type of item is worth a different number of points, and there's 2 of each item. Now here comes the fun part. If you pick items up in pairs, so you get the two radios together, or the two televisions together, then you get a bonus multiplier. And for each consecutive pair of items you do, the bonus multiplier grows. And since each item is worth a different number of points, there becomes a route that you want to take to get the maximum number of points out of each stage. It goes radio, television, computer, painting, safe. If you do it perfectly, that's 8,000 points for collecting the sets. Of course, it wouldn't be that simple. Namco starts right next to a radio, the very first item you want to collect. The safe is right there and easy to pick up at the start, but that's typically the last item you want to collect. There's a computer and television right next to each other. If you've been picking up items in the correct order and take the path the right way, then you get your pair and get the next item. Of course, you don't have to go for maximum points on each Mappy level, but once you know that you can, you kinda have to try. Finally, we have the bonus stages. They occur every 4 stages, starting with the 3rd stage. You have to bounce and try to collect all the balloons before the time runs out. If you play it straight, you'll never make it, but there's a couple of tricks you can use. You can time switching lanes exactly right to collect multiple balloons. Also, you can intentionally ram the wall to rapidly descend when you need to break through to something below. You have to be super good to be able to collect all the balloons in the bonus stage. And that, finally, is everything you need to know about how to play Mappy. It's crazy the amount of nuance that Namco fit into this apparently simple game. It's pretty hard, too. As the levels increase, the cats get faster and more numerous. Also, the time that you have before Gosenzo-sama appears decreases, although I never really ran into trouble there. The game has 12 house patterns that it loops through. Due to the bonus stages, they repeat every 16 levels. Mappy is a game that puts a lot of pressure on the player, as the Mukis will run you down quickly and pinch you. Even that first loop is incredibly difficult to get through. Before I start wrapping things up, I've got one more thing I have to mention about Mappy. This is the first game we've gotten with some genuinely fun music. Xevious has its little fanfare, though I'm not super fond of it. The Mappy tune, on the other hand, that'll get stuck in your head. So what compromises did Namco make bringing the arcade game home? Well, Mappy in the arcade uses a vertically orientated screen, so it's narrower and taller. Rather than move the scoring to the side like they did with Pac-Man, Namco chose to just reduce the number of levels in the house by 1. Given how much side-to-side scrolling there is in Mappy, I think that was the right choice. It certainly doesn't feel like a compromise when you're playing the Famicom version. Where did Mappy go from here? Well, there's 2 Famicom sequels we have coming up. I think with Mappy's release in 1984, Namco has marked themselves as the best developer for the Famicom at the time. The only Nintendo games on the level of Mappy and Xevious are Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. Mappy's a fantastic home conversion of the arcade game. It's a shame that this one was never released outside of Japan. I think Clu Clu Land gets a bad rap. Or it would get a bad rap if people ever remembered it existed. Clu Clu Land is very much a, oh yeah, Nintendo made that, didn't they, game. And those rare times that people do remember it exists, Clu Clu Land tends to get met with derision. But I kind of like Clu Clu Land. It's nowhere near one of my top Famicom picks, but as a game to pick up and play for 10 minutes, I like it. That does mean I miss out on some of Clu Clu Land's special features, though. Clu Clu Land stars a pair of creatures called either Groupie or Gloopy, depending on how you want to transliterate the Japanese. Personally, I think neither option's really great, but I'm going to stick with Groupie for this. The distinctive thing about Groupie is how she moves. Groupie slides continuously through the maze and will never stop. You can't directly control her path either. Instead, when you press in a direction, Groupie sticks her arm out that way. If she can grab onto a post, then she'll fling herself around until you let go. It's a tricky control scheme, but it's also what makes Clu Clu Land distinctive. So Groupie is an undersea creature who has a lot of gold bars that are hidden in between posts. Running Groupie in between the posts reveals the bar. If you reveal all the gold bars in the maze, then you go on to the next level. The levels progress from red to green to blue to purple to what they call yellow because of the border. And each color background has a set of 4 possible patterns to it. When you start the game, which pattern you're running is determined randomly. Complete all 5 and you return to red, but with a new set of patterns. And if you complete all 20 patterns, then the game advances to the next phase, where running over a revealed gold bar hides it again. In between these cycles, there is a bonus round where your goal is to just reveal as many of those bars as possible. It wouldn't be a maze chase game without monsters to chase you. Groupie's foes are Unira, a name taken from the Japanese word for sea urchin. The Unira emerge from these whirlpools and slowly wander the maze. They're not especially aggressive, though. If Groupie runs over one of those holes, she goes down it herself unless she's holding on to a bar. If an Unira gets in Groupie's way, Groupie can shoot an electric wave at them. And Unira's spines retract when hit, and then Groupie can shove them into a wall to eliminate them for a short period. Occasionally objects will appear in the maze to get picked up. The fruit and the cash bag are just bonus points. The flag, however, is an extra life. And if you pick up the alarm clock, the timer stops, and the Unira freeze. Strangely, Clu Clu Land is pretty generous with the lives. You get 5 lives when you start the game. Clu Clu Land is a 2-player game and both players run the maze simultaneously. Unfortunately, I still couldn't sucker anyone into demonstrating that with me. Clu Clu Land has kind of a strange legacy. It got kind of a pseudo-sequel / enhanced port as the very last full FDS game in 1992. What really endured from Clu Clu Land are the graphics. The gold bars were reused as Zelda's rupees, and the Unira turn up in Super Mario World. Now, I don't think Clu Clu Land is a spectacular game. It speeds up way too fast and becomes crazy to control. You can get weird situations like this due to the way the control scheme works. And the control scheme itself can be difficult to wrap your mind around. But I also don't mind plugging it in every couple of months and playing a few rounds. It's a fine little arcade game, and it really doesn't need to be anything else. Excitebike was one of my childhood favorites. Zipping along, pulling off those big jumps, and making your own crazy tracks to give yourself a real challenge. It's a simple game, hence the short video, but there's a real charm to it, and when it was released, there was nothing else quite like it out there. You've got your motocross racer on a 4-lane track. No splitting lanes for you. You just stick to those 4. A runs your motor normally, but B over-revs your motor, giving you more speed in exchange for potentially overheating it. If you want a good time on the tracks, you have to run hot constantly. You'll cool down when you run over one of these track markers, but sometimes you'll just need to back off or you'll wind up sitting beside the track waiting for your motor to cool down. Leaning the bike backward and forward is the key to taking jumps well. You want to tilt the bike so that it matches the surface that it's going to land on. Come down wrong and you might bounce, losing a bit of speed, or worse, crash. If you do crash and get thrown from the bike, tapping the A button rapidly will get you back on quicker. The tracks are really what make Excitebike fun. You wouldn't think that they could put so much variety into what's essentially a bike jump, but with around a dozen basic ramps, Nintendo combined them in many ways to make jumps that require a bit of thought to do well. There's 5 tracks in Excitebike, and each of them bring their own distinct challenges. Although track 1 is set up as the learner's course, I've always found track 3 to be the easiest, since many of the obstacles are the speed bumps that you have to just wheelie over. When you start the game, you're given the choice to begin at any of the 5 tracks, but regardless of which one you choose, you have to qualify on that track first. So you'll play the first track you choose twice in a row, and then after that, you'll play through the remaining tracks. If you beat track 5, then track 5 just repeats. Game Mode A is strictly a time trial. It's just you and the track. Game Mode B introduces other racers on the track. Although they can interfere with you, for the most part the AI on those just tries to avoid dirt and mud holes. You can knock over the other bikers by letting your rear wheel collide with their front wheel, which sends them tumbling. I kind of find the other racers on the track to be more irritating than challenging to deal with. They come across as annoyances in your way, rather than actual competitors. You're not jockeying for position, you're just trying to improve your time because that's the only thing Excitebike ranks you on. And then we have Design Mode. I have to wonder if Nintendo was influenced by Hudson including design modes in their 2 games. But at the same time, Family Basic had been released earlier that year, and Nintendo may have been looking for something else to use their peripherals with. Design Mode gives you all of the elements that Nintendo used to build their tracks, and you can lay them out however you want. You can build some pretty long courses with it, too. Once you've placed the ending, you get to choose how many laps you make people run of it. You're not limited to 2 laps like the other Excitebike courses are. The Famicom version lets you save your courses to the Famicom data recorder, a tape drive that was intended for saving programs made in Family Basic. Sadly, that's a peripheral I don't have, so I can't demonstrate that for you. Excitebike had an odd legacy. Like many of Nintendo's releases in '84, it was ported to the arcade as Versus Excitebike. Now that arcade version got ported back to the Famicom Disk System, also as Versus Excitebike. That version of Excitebike has extra tracks, as well as a multiplayer mode. Excitebike was pretty popular on the Famicom, and I can totally get why. It's fun, it's fast to play, and it's got that community aspect to it with the level sharing. Over 1.5 million copies were sold, and it was the 13th best-selling Famicom game of all time. The worst thing I have to say about it is that for the premium that they're charging, they should have put in some extra memory chips and doubled the number of tracks. One more thing before I wrap up. Excitebike brings 1984 to a close. The Famicom boom has begun, and 1985 is going to see it in full force.